There is a seal on one.
So we're not actually in session until I sit down. So it's all right. Yes. Mercifully unforeseen. Very well, we continue now with the debate on P.65, Public Elections Extension of Eligibility Criteria. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak on the proposition, Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to see everybody else is so shy. Let me just try and get myself organised here, pull this apart. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so this is a debate about belonging and what we understand by that. It's really interesting to hear Deputy Gardner comments about that feeling inside, that desire to complete the circle. Deputy Scott referenced in her speech our relationship with the UK, and I remind members of the following. The primary law governing nationality in the United Kingdom is the British Nationality Act of 1981, which regulations apply to the British Isles, and that obviously includes Crown dependencies, Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, etc. As well as a legal status, citizenship can also indicate a subjective feeling of identity and social relations to reciprocity, I'm hoping and responsibility. Sometimes these are described, as Deputy Balash has said, in words like loyalty, values, belonging, or shared cultural heritage. This also points to the complex and often assumed relation between citizenship and belonging to the nation. People feel very strongly about this subject. Many years ago, controversially, Norman Tebbit famously called it the cricket test. If anybody's old enough in here to remember that one, it was very controversial at its time. But Deputy Porry raised good questions as to what is Britishness, what are British values, what is belonging. Deputy Mezek says it costs money. Yes, you do need to invest in your community. That's the rule. If you're not prepared to invest in the community, then why should your community by default invest in you? Citizenship matters. Thank you for the wow. Citizenship matters. Citizenship is obviously important to millions of people. If it wasn't, why did Brexit happen? That sense of being in control of your own affairs. There's the currently infamous example, which is still ongoing, and sadly, around Shamima Begum. In February 2019, Shamima Begum, if those of you recall this, was discovered alive in a refugee camp in northern Syria by a war correspondent. But the moment she was found, her British citizenship was revoked. And it was stated that Begum would never be allowed to return to the United Kingdom. The government's priority remains to maintain the safety and security of the UK, and we will robustly defend any decision made in so doing. That's a hugely controversial decision, but again, it talks to the subject matter of citizenship and how strongly people feel about belonging to something. So Deputy Scott also highlights cybersecurity issues as a new phenomenon. We've just recently seen Romania, the Constitutional Court, annulled the first round of the country's 2024 presidential election process due to concerns about aggressive hybrid Russian attacks. They also showed how Ceausescu was boosted by potential interference in TikTok, the social media platform on which he largely ran his campaign, through algorithms, coordinated accounts, and paid promotion, etc. So these are the concerns, real-life concerns, which people have about, are people on our side? Do they believe in the same values and issues as we do? So the issue, in conclusion, sir, is hugely personal. Identity itself is hugely personal. I believe, though, that we have laws to which we all submit ourselves, and one of these is citizenship. It's not that we can't change laws, it's just, for me, that it sits at the core of my beliefs. The way I think, and I'm hugely proud of that, and feel it's a privilege to be part of a nation that has had such an impact on our lives, and therefore I will not be supporting the proposition.
Thank you very much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. This was an interesting debate when we talk about
identity and nationality and citizenship and so on, it's a time when I recognise most strongly that I'm an immigrant to this island. I've been here about 24 years, about 24 years. And then I think about what's my loyalty to? I've worked hard, I've paid my taxes, I've worked for the Assembly, I've tried to do my best by constituents, I've become part of a community, I've brought my children up here. Is that enough? Is that enough for me to be accepted, to be part of a community? Or would I need to take a test to prove it? Would I need to take a written test? Because I don't have to, because of my birthright. I was born in London. I'm a East London boy. My loyalties are to Leyton Orient and sorry sir, you probably know them as the mighty Leyton Orient.
Or I don't know them at all.
The joke is, sir, you might know them as Leyton Orient Neil, but that's not true anymore. And there we go. We have an example, sir, of where our loyalties lie and understanding of those. And I think very quickly we can shift between the gossamer thin layer of nationalism, which can be unhealthy, and nationalism, which is about pride in what we achieve together. And I think we have to be extraordinarily careful when we talk about these issues. I am nationally proud of, I don't know what, the NHS, gave birth to me and my wife worked in, and those sorts of things, of the history of trade unionism in the UK and workers' rights, in so many things about Britain and England. I'm very proud to be part of Jersey. My children had a great childhood here. I've made lots of friends, an incredibly caring community when things go wrong, as we've seen in so many occasions. But that, sir, is not anything to do with where I was born, where I was given birth to, in the Salvation Army Mothers' Home in Lower Clapton Road, sir. I know, I looked it up the other day, there's a Facebook group, anyway. Remarkable experience, sir. And I think when we look at this debate, we need to think about what we want people on this island to contribute to this island, particularly when they come to this assembly. Do we want them simply to be hard-working, committed members of our community who want to do the best for Jersey, who are open and transparent about what they believe and what they stand for, and are willing to stand on the front door and say to people, this is what I stand for. I want you to elect me for this assembly in order that I may vote on the laws that you live by. Not once was I asked on the doorstep, probably for all sorts of reasons, as to whether I was a British citizen. In fact, citizenship, sir, is probably something, if you ask many people about, they're unsure as to what it means. They just want to be part of a community. And so what we have at the moment is a pool of talent on this island that cannot be used simply because it has not paid for an expensive test to prove some sort of strange loyalty. And so I'd worry about what the citizenship test would, who's forming it, who's defining British citizenship. You know, if I wrote the test, it would be very, very different. If my colleagues wrote the test, it would be very, very different. And there is an analogy to football teams and how that loyalty comes. No one really knows. Mine is because it was my local team. Some people make the mistake of being, for example, Manchester United fans, or even worse, sir, Tottenham Hotspur fans. But we have to accept people for what they are, sir. And we have to accept that diversity and difference. And when we do that, sir, we know they have something to contribute. So, sir, I want people to think before they look at this as, what is so valuable that one test that makes a difference to that person that you know, you live near, you share your community with, you might share your friendship with, you might share dinner with, your drink, views, you may have the similar views on the way that the world works. And so I think if you put obstacles in the way to talented people for no specific reason, then I think we have to be very careful. And so, yes, there is an issue, and I agree with Deputy Morrell when he talks about island identity. And I looked up the island identity website, and there's a very interesting paragraph that says, citizenship is an issue distinct from nationality, and it is not exclusive. An individual in Jersey may legitimately identify themselves as a British citizen, a Jersey citizen, and a Polish national all at the same time. And I think that's where we are. You can identify as all of those things at the same time, but be very loyal, in inverted commas, very committed to life in Jersey. And if that's what you bring, then the electorate will look at that and decide whether or not they want you in this assembly. That, to me, is the real important point of this. Do the electorate want you here? And if they don't, you will not be elected. If they do, you will. Regardless of your citizenship, regardless of where you were born, regardless of so many other things, I hope, but I'm not so sure about. And that's the key thing today. So I'd ask people, I think the fear of this lack of this test is a problem. And I can't answer the things about cybersecurity because I simply can't believe that that is a genuine concern. I'm not sure which part of the British citizenship test ensures that you will not be a cybersecurity risk. I'm not sure what that is, and so subsequently, I'm really not sure that that is a link that I can comment on. So I finished very quickly then by saying, please consider the people that you know around you, the people that we share this island with, the people that we work and talk to and share our spaces with every day. Do you really want to exclude them because they haven't taken a test, or do you want to see what they could bring, the talents that they have, and the abilities that we bring to this assembly to make it a better, a richer, more diverse, and a better place to be? Thank you, sir.
Very much. Conor Thompson.
Thank you, sir. And this has been a really interesting, very thought-provoking debate, and I'm pleased to follow Deputy Ward, who says that he's been here for 20 years. The Shenton family actually came to Jersey in the late 1790s, and I've been told throughout my life that we're not really Jersey because we haven't been here for 500 years and we don't have a French name. So no disrespect to the Morels or the Hegares, but we've been here longer, but we aren't the Shenton or whatever. So, and the other thing is there are four in my family, and Theo, Anastasia and I are all Jersey, Perry is English. Theo, Anastasia and I are also Canadian because I was born in Canada and Anastasia studied in Canada, and Perry is also Irish. He also has quite strong Dutch ancestry. And going way back, I've got Norwegian. But a really interesting point to this, I suddenly remembered that when I was in my early 20s and I worked for the Islander magazine, I was sent to do some photojournalism and photograph and interview Dr. Frank LeMaitre, who was a campaigner, author and lexicographer, and his Dictionnaire Français was published in 1966. And he said to me, "Oh, it's a pity that you're not really Jersey." And I said, well, you've been here for quite a long time. And he was the one who said, yes, you've been here since 1792. I've looked you up. And he said, it's such a pity you're not really Jersey. He said, because you look like a real Jersey person. Because you look, because I was blonde and blue eyes. Because he thought I looked Viking. But then I thought, but most of the Jersey people I know don't look like that anyway. But anyway, so for the Summer Olympics, I always support the UK. For the Winter Olympics, I always support Canada. I do like ice hockey. I do love snowshoeing. And so it's really interesting that there's four of us, and we've got, so Perry identifies as English. If you told my daughter she's English, she's absolutely not. She's Jersey. She's Jersey Canadian. My son's more in the middle. I have an English mother, a Jersey father. My children have an English father and, Jersey Canadian mother. So, it's just really interesting that, and so I might have stood here and everyone would assume, you're just, you're English or Jersey or whatever, but in my family, there's a lot. So I'm not completely sure actually now how I am voting on this. So I'll just wait to hear the summing up or the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the previous previous two speakers, I can say I am actually what might be considered a true Jersey girl. The reason why I know that is because I have a stamp in my passport which says so. But that's just one of my passports, because I also stand here as a dual citizen. I also have Australian citizenship. I am one of the members of this assembly that has taken a citizenship test, albeit in another country. What did that change? What did that change to me as a resident of Australia? Did it change the way I did my job? I don't think so. Did it change what I knew about the country that I loved and lived in? No. I did the test. I read the booklet. The booklet is actually very divisive in Australia because it tells you a history, one side of a country's history, potentially not the other. So it didn't make me, I think, a better citizen of that country. What made me a better member of that community was living with other members of the community, learning from that very diverse community, learning about the real history of that country from those that had lived it, and also learning and working in that country. The citizenship, the only true change that citizenship gave me was the ability to vote. I was a civil servant. I was able to provide advice to ministers. Was the advice I provided to ministers any better because I was a citizen? I don't think so. I think it remained the same. Again, my advice was only better because of the time I'd spent living in that country. I was sad to hear Deputy War's comments about the cost of paying for citizenship, and that somehow being a badge of being willing to give to a community, because I'm conscious that we have many members of our community that give a lot to our community, and they don't need to pay to be a citizen in order to do that. I'm also reminded of something that happened in Australia, where there was an anomaly where many elected members, it turned out, had dual citizenship, which is not allowed in that country. So we ended up in a situation whereby we had elected members, so the electorate had decided that these members were the types of people that were fit for public office. They elected them and they won their seats, ended up losing their seats because it turned out they were dual citizens. Some of those may have well stood again and then regained their seats once they'd renounced their citizenship. Did renouncing the dual citizenship make them any more or less of an elected representative? Probably not. Did the electorate of Australia lose some very good representatives because of that anomaly? Probably. And I would in fact say yes. So I think we need to be very careful when we talk about citizenship being such an important aspect and citizenship being the mark of loyalty. To me, living within a community, choosing to spend your time within a community and giving to that community in the many ways that people that aren't British citizens give to our community are the most important factors, and I will be fully supporting this proposition.
Very much. Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And like the Constable of St Martin, I even now am unsure as to the way I'm going to vote. I don't see it as a question of nationality as much as, if I dare look into my old trade, one word that's not yet been mentioned is one's domicile. For tax purposes, one can be resident, and one can be resident in more than one country for tax purposes, or domiciled. And for domicile, you have only one domicile. You start off life with your domicile of origin, and you keep that until you exercise a domicile of choice in another jurisdiction. There are people in Jersey who are valuable citizens, and the question I have is to whether, despite their value in the current climate, would they really say they have decided to spend the rest of their days in Jersey? To me, that is important, because however valuable they are and however much they play a part in the community, the laws to which they will be party and have a part in passing will endure beyond their time. And I think it is important to decide where ultimately they wish to spend the rest of their days. Certainly as an elector, the question of nationality wouldn't in itself wouldn't bother me. But I question whether I would vote for them if they said, well, yes, I was born in whatever country it was, I like it here, I want to play a valuable part here, but when I retire, I want to go back to my country X. To me, that wouldn't be a sufficient commitment to justify my voting for them. And that's an individual decision. That is a question I have to ask myself, and a question I would ask a candidate. And I suspect it doesn't really help anyone else in this debate, but it is that domicile denotes commitment for life, and pure residence in a country where they might change that, and by having properties in another jurisdiction, which some people do, that would, to my mind, undermine their candidacy. So, as I say, sir, I'm not sure it helps anyone, but I think on balance, I may be veering towards opposing this motion, because I don't think residence for however long is sufficient in itself. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to say a great deal. I would, however, just like to address the idea that we've heard today, that the taking of British citizenship is utterly meaningless and nothing more than a scrap of paper. In my previous role, I often saw the court lists for the Assembly Court on a Friday morning, and I often had cause to sit in the Assembly Court on a Friday morning. And the first thing on the list was often people who were being naturalised as British, who were being naturalised or were taking British citizenship. And it always struck me, you probably can't express a view, sir, that those were one of the few occasions in court which were really quite joyful. I was always amazed by the number, the range of countries from which people came to Jersey and were naturalised or took British citizenship. And it was always clear to me that for many of them, it was a very joyful occasion, and it absolutely meant something to them. And it was a cause for celebration. I have friends who are from South Africa who took British citizenship through Jersey, and it was a cause for celebration. And to dismiss it so lightly, I think, could only be done by someone who has been given British citizenship by accident of birth. For many, many people in many parts of the world, coming to Britain, the journey to get to Britain, and then to go that extra step and take British citizenship is very, very valuable, and it really, really means something to them, and I don't think we should discount that lightly. Because those people were always very happy. It was very clearly very happy that I've seen them. This is a relatively small thing. I mean, Deputy Feltham has told us that she took Australian citizenship. It made no difference to her whatsoever in terms of her ability and her contribution, but it enabled her to vote, I think was what she said. So that tells me that in Australia, you must be a citizen if you want to vote. Now, that's quite a strict rule, and it seems to me that there are very many people on this island who are very accommodating of the rules in Australia and other parts of the world, but we don't want them over here, and we want them to be wider. So my main point is we should not discount the value to the individual concerned of taking citizenship. It's a very important step for very many people. Thanks.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. First, I'd just like to say response and agreement with the Constable of St Mary's in the fact that he demonstrated very much the ability we all have to question potential candidates, make a decision whether or not we're going to choose to elect them based on the facts that they wish to present to us. Because that's exactly every member of the electorate's right to do so. Whether that person is then a British citizen or not is immaterial. You had the questions that you wanted to know what their commitment is to the island, is what their policies are, what their preferences are, and that's what you'll base your decision on. I mean, with some members of this assembly. I'll take Deputy War, for example. He was born in Ireland. Now, I didn't realise that Deputy War was born in Ireland until it came out in this chamber, sir. So that means he possibly has Irish nationality as well as British nationality, depending on his story of origin. But of course that had no impact to I wonder how many of the electorate asked him whether he was born in Jersey, whether he was born in Britain, Great Britain, or in the Republic of Ireland. It doesn't come up. People base things on people's values, and that is what's important. And so, sir, I think making sure that people share your values is the reason why you vote for them, and they shouldn't be inhibited to do so just because of where they were born. Deputy Miller just made reference to Australia not being able to vote unless you're an Australian citizen. Well, it's the same in the UK. In the UK general elections, you're not allowed to vote unless you're a UK citizen, a British citizen. So there's a huge range of people who are able to vote in local council elections, police chief commissioners elections, but they're not allowed to vote in a general election. But we're removing people's right to the democratic process. They're removing people's right to the democratic process, but that is their choice. That is the country's choice, their representatives' choice. If their representatives' choice choose to bring that to the Houses of Parliament to have that motion rescinded, they can do so. And so this is why this proposition is before us today, as we are an island that's branching further and further into multiculturalism. Do we want to embrace these other cultures that come to Jersey and have them be part of our side, helping us form ourselves for the future? For me, that is an incredibly important thing. And we've also heard in this chamber within this year, we talk about our Jersey identity, but we link our Jersey identity back to speaking French. But of course, you can't be a French citizen. Well, you can be a French citizen as long as you're a British citizen, and also run for election. So are we French or are we British? Because that's sometimes in the question, is our identity French? As in this French-speaking, linking our culture back to the speaking French. A lot of our laws are written in French. But is somebody allowed to be a French citizen and run for Jersey? No. But are they then not part of our culture? Of course they can be. So, sir, I think the notion of having to be a British citizen to stand for election is restrictive and also absurd, sir, so I will be supporting this.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Taylor to respond.
Thank you, sir. First of all, can I thank members? I think it's been a useful debate. I think we've had some very thoughtful contributions on all sides, and it's always interesting when you get to learn little bits about your colleagues that you didn't know before, and it reminds us that we've all got a personal story that we bring to the Assembly, which I think informs what we bring to the job, sir. And I thank members who have shared perhaps more candidly than they might usually do. It's particularly interesting to hear from my party colleague, Deputy Feltham, and when she talked about doing her Australian citizenship test when she was living out there, it reminded me of a friend I had who told me that she failed her Australian nationality test on the first attempt. And of course I said to her, "Did you redo it?" And thankfully she did, and she got her nationality. And actually in her speech, that pun was going around my head this morning for some unknown reason. Last night and this morning, I had that thought of the didgeridoo, and it's clearly that if it had been a dream, then Deputy Feltham would have broken my dream, so to speak. On a more serious point, sir, now everybody's woken up. We are approaching the 80th anniversary, sir, of the occupation of our island and the liberation thereof in 1945. And there were lots of talk about loyalty and what that means. And just as there have been interesting and individual stories recounted today in the debate, there are still lots of new stories which are coming out even today from the occupation. And something that Deputy Mezek said, and I think others have also said, is that loyalty to your island isn't dependent on your nationality or your passport. There were some beautifully moving stories from the occupation of bravery, which are often countermeasured with tragic stories for the same people who were denounced. And there were good Jersey people, whether they were born here and had British nationality, and there were others who were not British citizens who lived in Jersey and did great things for the resistance in our island. And to question somebody's loyalty on the absence of having a particular nationality or having converted your nationality, I think is bordering on the offensive. I think in particular of the two women who lived in my constituency in St. Brelade, I mentioned them before, that they go under their birth names of Lucy Schwab and Suzanne Malherbe, who did a great effort helping many people during the occupation, including Russian and Ukrainian and Spanish forced prisoners of war, although that's not necessarily what they're best known for. And there were they stood alongside women like Louisa Gould from St. Juan's, who gave up her life ultimately and was murdered in the concentration camps for possessing a radio. And they would have been denounced by other Jersey people who also had British nationality, who were quite happy to denounce them to the Germans, to the Nazis for whatever reason, because they thought that they were breaking the Nazis' rules. So this idea about loyalty and being British, I'm afraid, doesn't wash. And we should be very sensitive to that argument 80 years on from the occupation. Another lesson I think we can learn from history is the argument about othering. So what is the concept of othering? It's saying that people are different. If you look different to me, if you have different beliefs, you have different sexuality, you have different skin colour, you have a different nationality in this case, you're different to us. You're welcome here, and we will extend some rights to you. And it was unfortunate almost to hear, I think reading between the lines, this idea was saying, well, hang on a minute, you can already vote. What do you mean that you want more rights? I'm sorry, actually, voting and I think standing for election is something of a duty and a responsibility. And so I think the analogy I gave earlier to Caroline Trashy and to all those, in fact, men and women previously who couldn't vote and all those men and women who couldn't stand for election, it is part of a continuum, and it is a valid analogy, because actually it might have been Caroline Trashy fighting for her right to stand for election over 100 years ago, but now it is perhaps people who can't stand for election on the basis of their nationality, who might not actually be fighting for it, but at least somebody can fight for them because they may wish to at least stand and represent their community. Deputy War talks about the idea of investing in one's community. And I think we're getting fixated on this idea of a British nationality test and citizenship test, which some people can take. The first thing to say is that not everybody is eligible for British nationality. I've looked through the British government website, and they don't just hand out British nationality like sweets, because as Deputy Miller said, it is an important thing. And of course, people will seek citizenship for all sorts of reasons. And I suspect standing for election is not normally high on the top of their lists. They do it for all sorts of reasons, but it is a complex issue, and it's not everybody who can necessarily be in a position, even if they've lived in Jersey maybe for decades. I suspect as a single person, depending where you're from, it's not easily going to be automatic or sure that you would be eligible for that. There are many ways that you can invest in the community. So somebody could invest in Jersey's community. I think saying that by taking a citizenship test you're investing in Jersey's community, I think is a bit of a stretch. You could have somebody who's not British and invests in charities, either with their time or their money, sets up cafes, restaurants, runs facilities as part of the community, and it comes down to that simple line in the law which we have, which says, I'm sorry, you can't stand for election because you don't have the right passport, you don't have the right nationality. And the point is, going back to the Caroline Trashy argument, is that she was trying to get the members of a particular club to change the rules of that club. And the club at the time says, we don't have women here, it's an all-men's club. And the argument we're having in 2024 is that we don't have non-Brits, please, we're an all-British club. Okay, so that's the idea. And I look at, in the direction of Deputy Morell, and I also understand his argument, is that we have this scenario whereby we privilege the residents of different countries over other countries. So we talk about Jersey as an island nation. So I'm looking at Deputy Balash at the moment. he says, and I think I'm happy to agree with it, that Jersey can be considered an island nation. We are a nation and we can call ourselves the nation of Jersey. But there is a nation of Scotland, there's a nation of Wales, there's a nation of England, and there's a nation of Ireland. But there's also a nation of France and Romania and lots of other countries in the world, including the Commonwealth countries, which some have mentioned. And so we're saying that actually a national of Scotland can come to Jersey and stand for election, but a national of France, which is only a few miles away and we have Norman traditions, can't come to Jersey and stand for election. The point is that we should make the rules about our nation and the parliament of our nation as open or as closed as we want to. So I'll leave members with this thought, because I'm not going to go on for very long. Ultimately, this does come down to a simple argument, is that today we can send a message out to people that of what kind of island we are, what kind of assembly, what kind of parliament we want to be. Do we want to actually open up our assembly to more people to stand for election, or do we want to actually close our doors and say that some people are worth less than others, sir? I maintain the proposition, sir, and I do ask for the appel.
That is called for. Any members not in the Assembly who wish to come and vote, please do so. And ask referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 14 votes pour, 31 votes contre, 1 abstention.
Can we have the 14 and the 1, please, sir?
Those voting contre, the connotabs of St Heliers, St Lawrence, St Bralard, Trinity, St Peter, St John, St Clement, St Mary and St Saviour, deputies Labby, Lehegara, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, Farnham, Moore, Osoph, Balash, War, Miles, Scott, Rose Binney, Miller, Howe, Tom Binney, Ferry, Curtis, Ward, Wilson and Andrews, and online the connotab of St Juan. Those voting pour, the connotab of Grouville and deputies Southern, Tadier, Dublé, Ward, Mezek, Coles, Renouf, Curtis, Faltham, Kovac, and online deputies Alves, Porre, deputies Alves, Porre and Deputy Jeune. And the abstention was the connotab of St Martin.
Very well. We now come to the draft Social Security Law, Parental Allowance and Death Grant, Jersey Amendment Regulations P.65, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The main responder is the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Social Security Law, Parental Allowance and Death Grant, Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 50 of the Social Security Jersey Law 1974.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to be bringing these regulations to the Assembly today. As I mentioned in the written report accompanying this legislation, I'm bringing them to the Assembly as one set of regulations to make more effective use of policy, legislative drafting and Assembly resources. However, members will have the opportunity to vote separately on the different regulations should the principles be adopted. These changes, if adopted, will amend the Social Security law and make changes to the rules for 2 Social Security contributory benefits, the Parental Allowance and the Death Grant. The Parental Allowance is a benefit which supports parents to take time off work to care for a new baby. The allowance is paid weekly at £283.01, and parents can be eligible for up to 32 weeks. The Death Grant is an amount of money paid when someone dies at £1,132.04, usually to help with funeral costs. The changes to the parental allowance aim to implement a previous decision of this Assembly following the adoption of P.52 2023, lodged by Deputy Raluca Kovac, and would make provision for additional weeks of parental allowance to be awarded to parents that have babies that require urgent hospital care, either when they are born prematurely or need that care in the first 28 days of life. The changes to the death grant will modernise and align this part of legislation with other social security and employment law rules, and would allow the grant to be paid in respect of stillbirths. I would like to extend my thanks to officers at the Office of the Superintendent Registrar and the Jersey General Hospital for their work with my officers as these proposals have been developed, and also both the Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel and the Children's Commissioner for taking time to meet with my officers to discuss these changes in more detail. I intend to provide more detail on each of these elements when the regulations are debated. However, I'd be pleased to answer any questions that members may have, and I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to the Minister for Social Security and her team for prioritizing the implementation of this proposition approved in principle last year. This is an important step forward in supporting families during some of the most challenging moments of their lives. The adopted proposition last year aimed to provide essential financial support to parents whose babies need neonatal care or are born prematurely. We all know that these situations bring not only financial burdens, but also intense emotional strain. This proposition that now looks to implement these needed changes is about more than just money. It's about compassion, equality, and respecting the diverse challenges faced by modern families. The changes to parental allowance regulations we're considering today will offer extra financial support to parents whose babies need urgent hospital care. This is especially important for parents of premature babies or babies who need hospital treatment in the first 28 days of life. For these families, the emotional and financial stress can be overwhelming. The additional weeks of parental allowance will give them more time to cope with these unexpected circumstances. The new flexibility to take the leave in 4 blocks instead of 3 will give families even more control over how they manage work and caregiving. The Minister very thoughtfully also added bereavement support for parents of stillborn children to these regulations. This change extends the death grant to parents who tragically lose a baby before birth, recognizing the unique grief they face. Until now, these parents were not eligible for the same financial support as parents who lose a child after birth. By closing this gap, we are ensuring that all parents, no matter when the loss occurs, receive the dignity and support they need during such a difficult time. All the changes the current proposal brings are about more than just providing financial support. They are about showing families in Jersey that they are not alone during the hardest moments of their lives. This is about ensuring that the government's safety net is there when it's needed most. I hope the Assembly will support these regulations today as well, not just as a policy measure, but as a clear commitment to the well-being and dignity of every family in our community. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon Deputy Feltham to respond.
Thank you, sir. I don't think there's anything that I need to respond to Deputy Kovac, aside to thank her for her original proposition. So, sir, I maintain the principles.
Do you call for the appel, or?
Yes, sir.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. If there are any not in the chamber, I ask the referee to open the voting. The vote is on the principles for P66. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 47 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Deputy Doublé, does your panel seek to call the matter in?
No, thank you, sir. We have had a briefing on this and we're content with it.
Very much. How do you wish to propose the regulations, Minister, in second reading?
So I'd like to request that the regulations are taken separately, starting with regulations 1, 2 and 3.
Very well. Do you wish to propose those, or do you just want to move them at this point and we'll call for a second?
I wish to propose I wish to propose them.
Very well. We'll just propose. Are they seconded? That's regulations 1, 2 and 3. Very well. Does anyone wish to speak on 1, 2 and 3, or either of them? Or any combination of them? No one wishes to speak, then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting regulations 1, 2 and 3 kindly show.
We have the appels, please, sir.
The appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seat. Vote is on 1, 2 and 3 of the proposed regulations, and ask the greffier to open the voting. And members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And regulations 1, 2 and 3 have been adopted. 46 votes for, no votes contrary, no abstentions. How do you wish to deal with the rest, Minister?
So I'd now like to take regulations 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8.
4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 seconded. And does any member wish to speak on 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8? No member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate. All those in favour of adopting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kindly show. The appel is called for. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 in second reading. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. All 5, 6, 7 and 8 have been adopted. 47 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstention. Do you wish to propose the remaining regulations?
Sir, I wish to propose regulation 9.
Is regulation 9 seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on regulation 9? Conetarbus and Brillard.
Thank you, sir. Just, I'm curious to know if the death grant is sufficient to cover the costs actually for a child's funeral.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak on regulation 9, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you to the Constable for your question. That's not a question. I would hazard a guess that it's not. It wouldn't be enough, and I will go back and get some more detail from the department and see how get back to the Constable. I think the important thing at this point in time is that we pass the regulations so that people in this situation can receive the relevant grant.
Very well. I assume the appel is called for, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on 9. If members would like to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Regulation 9 is adopted. 47 votes for, no votes contrary, no abstentions. You propose the remaining regulations, Minister?
Yes, sir, I do.
Are they seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the remaining regulations, specifically 10, 11 and 12? No member wishes to speak. I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting the regulations 10, 11 and 12 kindly show.
The appel, please.
That is called for. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on regulations 10, 11 and 12. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations 10, 11, 12 have been adopted. 47 votes for, no votes contrary, no abstentions. Do you propose in third reading, Minister?
Yes, sir.
Are they seconded for third reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. I'm assuming the appel is called for again, so I ask the greffier to open the voting on the adoption of the regulations in third reading. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the regulations have been adopted in third reading, 47 votes for, no votes contrary, no abstentions. The next item of public business is reporting on ministerial affairs, P71, lodged by Deputy Moore, and the main responder is the Chief Minister. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to request the Chief Minister to update the codes of conduct and practice for ministers and assistant ministers before 31st of December 2024 to enable new practices to be implemented on the 1st of January 2025, to include the requirement for A, details of all external meetings attended by ministers and assistant ministers to be published monthly in arrears on the government website, and B, details of all off-island travel by ministers and assistant ministers, including the costs incurred, to be published within 30 days of return to the island on the government website.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. So this is a simple proposition to support openness and transparency in our system. Many people I have consulted consider the proposition to be a no-brainer. These measures are in place in most jurisdictions, both large and small, from the EU to the Isle of Man, and it is something that is easily achievable. It is a pity that the government has adopted a negative position in their comments. They state, sir, that the timeframe is difficult, that this proposition was lodged on the 11th of October, sir. If time was genuinely an issue, they could have amended this proposition. There has been plenty of time. Instead, it is easy to conclude that they choose to oppose for opposition's sake. Of course, that only causes people to wonder what it is that they are trying to hide. That's how the public outside will feel. Why is it that this government doesn't widely use social media or communicate regularly when it is with its public? It is essential to communicate clearly and accessibly with the public, sir, to help them to understand the roles of government, the priorities of government, and to provide reassurance as to the priority of government. As it stands, the island sits at the bottom of the OECD's league table that measures civic engagement. Do the government not want to turn that around? This is a poor sign, in my view, of the state of health of our democracy, and I would hope that the government works hard to rebuild the trust and confidence of the public by improving its communications with them. Indeed, sir, this morning we've seen the publication of the Jersey Opinion and Lifestyle Survey, the most recent one, which again shows that this very assembly is the least trusted organisation in the island. That is a sad state of affairs, and this proposition offers an opportunity to members to help to turn that around. So I will now speak more specifically to the comments, which suggest, for example, that there would be cost involved. As stipulated in my proposition, I believe that there is adequate resource which is willing and able to deliver on this simple request. It would be quite simple to develop an addition to the Code of Ministerial Conduct to provide guidelines that set simple expectations on this. It does not need to go to PPC for deliberation. That is, sir, I'm afraid, quite simply a delay tactic. What a minister does and does not do on a daily basis is a matter for everyone. That is what identifies their priorities. It reveals the action behind the big words. Sir, it demonstrates how the people are represented by those who are in the room for them. Of course, different ministers behave in different ways. As the comments reveal, some prefer off-site meetings or phone calls. It would perhaps be even more important in those circumstances that there is some record of those discussions. Not, of course, the details, but simply that a discussion on X or Y matter took place with A or B. The comments also suggest that this proposition asks for information relating to private interests. I do not believe that it does, and I agree that officials are not expected to be involved with their ministers' private affairs. The comments also suggest that people should revert to the FOI system if they want to know about certain things. Firstly, sir, the FOI team are, I believe, kept quite busy enough, and I'm sure the government would not want to prioritise expanding that team. Second, sir, of course, if people don't know who a minister is meeting, how can they ask an appropriate question? Finally, what is there to hide? The question for the Chief Minister today is really, why not do this simple thing to help rebuild trust? Why not post about his meeting on social media, like former Chief Ministers have done? It is a sad state of affairs, sir, that this proposition has to be brought in the first place. It is even sadder that the government cannot embrace it. As parliamentarians, we're committed to the Nolan principles. This proposition relates to several aspects of those: openness, transparency, accountability, and leadership. And, sir, I ask members to respect those values by adopting this proposition today.
Thank you very much. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. The Chief Minister makes a compelling argument for this. So much so, sir, that I wonder why she didn't introduce it herself when she was leading the government. Of course, I do not accept the former Chief Minister's rhetoric in relation to the fact that we are opposing this for opposition's sake, or we're trying to hide anything. Just the opposite. This government continues to work to improve transparency, and we will continue to do so, sir. The Council of Ministers are of the opinion that this proposition is not workable in the format in which it is presented. It is advisable to take time to properly consider the practicalities involved in implementing it, sir, especially in relation to the publication of external meetings. The timescale proposed does not afford a sufficient time to do this, and the Council of Ministers therefore are unable to support Part A or Part B of the proposition. Instead, we would like to refer the matter to the Privileges and Procedures Committee and so the Machinery of Government Subcommittee for further discussion around the detail that would be required to introduce something as proposed successfully. A number of factors have been considered by the Council of Ministers in relation to the decision. One is the accessibility and proximity of 49 elected members in this Assembly to the electorate, which is one of the great strengths of our political system. It allows our parishioners and constituents direct and regular access to us, their elected representatives, should they wish, at almost any time, and we believe this is a most valued aspect of our democracy. This is not an argument against further transparency, sir, but rather an argument in favour of preserving the accessibility and proximity of our existing political system. It is not necessarily right for Jersey to import the practices developed of other jurisdictions, most notably in the larger jurisdictions with millions of people, sir. We are an island of tens of thousands of people. We need a process that specifically serves the requirements of our own citizens. The proposition restricts its scope to the Council of Ministers and Assistant Ministers, who account for only 21 of the 49 members of the state, sir. And given the visibility of all states members in Jersey, it would certainly be appropriate, in our opinion, to consider this type of reporting to cover all members' activities, or at the very least, members on scrutiny and other committees. Their work should be considered as equally important and of interest to the public. So why just the ministers and assistant ministers? Deputy Moore's proposition is unclear on several key points. For example, what is meant by the term external meetings? We need clarification whether this will include meetings outside the minister's department or the government more generally, or does it mean external to Jersey? Does it mean off island? The treatment of meetings with constituents also needs to be clarified in terms of what could be reported. Should a reporting system include more informal meetings that were not pre-arranged? For example, should we record calls from organisations or individuals where detailed conversations are held, or impromptu meetings at public events where discussions are strayed into an area of a minister's official business, as they often do? Will organisations and individuals be put off from meeting with ministers because details of that meeting will be put in the public domain? Equally, will it encourage organisations and individuals to seek meetings with states members because of the publicity it could generate? There are also data protection considerations. For example, sir, would states members need to disclose before every meeting that is subject to publication, including who attended and the nature of the meeting? There are also a need to give due consideration to the confidentiality, particularly when individuals wish to discuss highly sensitive personal matters or when organisations want to discuss commercially sensitive issues. The report accompanying the proposition also refers to publishing information solely for ministerial business and professional activities. What does professional activities mean in this context? Is this a part of ministerial business, or is it distinct from ministerial business? Is it to do with constituency work? And if so, sir, in what way? The proposition does not provide sufficient time for all of these matters to be properly considered. It requires ministers to implement any new arrangements by the 1st of January, sir, which is too soon. In relation to travel, the government already publishes information on off-island trips, albeit not yet at the frequency proposed in the proposition. Provisional travel data for the year to date is appended to the comments that we presented. In January 2025, data will be published for the whole of 2024. The report covering 2023, the period of the previous government, will also be published as soon as all of the information has been collated. And we aim to present that information, so regardless of this proposition, on a quarterly basis next year. So to conclude, sir, having considered the matter carefully, the Council of Ministers is not able to support this proposition at the present time in its present format, sir. It is worth mentioning costs and resources, and taking soundings from other jurisdictions, and other small jurisdictions most recently at the British Irish Council. For those jurisdictions that do this, there is considerable resource involved. In our case, sir, it's not unmanageable. 21 ministers' diaries to report upon is not an insignificant piece of work and will take up time. So there's no getting around that. It's whether we think that's a good investment or time in time or not will depend upon the amount of detail ultimately we would decide to include. The Council of Ministers, as I said, would like to discuss this with privileges and procedures, and maybe put some more detail around it, sir, and propose, once we have done that, to bring something back to the Assembly that would find a sensible position on this to improve transparency. So on those grounds, I respectfully ask members to vote against the proposal, sir. and reject the proposition. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I was driven to put my light on because of the response from the Chief Minister, which I find interesting, and I'm sometimes, I think I've mentioned it in the Assembly before, depending on how members choose to take on a proposition, we make mountains out of molehills. And in the response here, we heard that, as written, the proposition is unworkable, is unclear, and I don't necessarily see that. So I would like, if now the Chief Minister has spoken, if any other ministers could provide details, because there's a huge lack of clarity that the Chief Minister says is not in here. And I dare say to him that a protean proposition could have perhaps an equally protean implementation, one that is flexible to the requirements implemented by the Council of Ministers. I think I've used the word taking on varied shapes and forms and meanings accurately. But what I mean by that is, in lieu of requiring the states to approve the practice and the processes, the concerns that the Chief Minister highlights out of, do we publish names, do we detail every meeting, that ball seems to be in the Council of Ministers' court, so to say. So if they are concerned about the labour to do this, they can implement it efficiently. If they're concerned about challenges with how they can do good government, so to speak, to have meetings where they feel trust can be held, that is all within how one implements this. And it could be as simple as a simple table saying meeting with a software consultancy company. That's not much detail, but that is a detail. And if the Assembly are unhappy with the form and format of that, and with the implementation of that practice within the updated Code of Conduct and Practice for Ministers, they can then take that to the Assembly and change that. So, sir, I think that the response on what's missing here is, in essence, that catch-22. If the deputy who brought this had brought an attached annex or schedule to be appended to the Code of Practice, she would likely have been told to be binding the hands of the Council of Ministers in implementing this. And in fact, the ambiguity or openness perhaps lends to implementing it however one likes. Now, speaking to those who've been ministers present and former, I think there's concern about how this is implemented. And I think that's a valid conversation to have. And I think the timetable is overly ambitious and I don't think would be met, frankly. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And so if a member wished to delay this, move this back, refer back to the deputy, there are many activities to play. But I think the principle of a greater level of publicity as to meetings and the conduct of business by ministers and assistant ministers in particular is a good thing to have. I don't think this is about overly watching and trying to have a kind of like a panopticon of ministers where we have states members and the public in the internal watchtower watching every minister as they conduct their business. But I think it is about understanding how ministers conduct their business, understanding therefore what business is being conducted or not being conducted. But I share the concerns that this should not be to the detail that we see in other parliaments. I don't think we need every single name. I don't think in many cases we need to know the business that people are talking to. And I think there are many cases where the entry will just be private meeting. And I think that's fine, sir. I just think that the response requires a little more clarification and optimism from the Council of Ministers and maybe other ministers who can speak. And lastly, on Part B, I have to fundamentally disagree with the Chief Minister in suggesting that quarterly publications are a good and sufficient idea. We have heard that we are trying to be efficient and embracing digital, and a world in which reports are quarterly, half-yearly or yearly is no longer, in my view, required in any way, and actually trackers and live publication is, in many ways, a far better way to do it. In fact, many of us keep daily lists of what we do because it doesn't build up a pile of receipts at the end of the month, or in this case a quarter. So I would urge him to consider changing his position on Part B, and I would ask ministers to respond with their positive views on how Part A could be implemented, even if they are to vote against it today, sir.
David Reynolds.
So, thank you very much. I think this really is a very simple step. The Chief Minister, I think, I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, but has avoided, I think, the central point that lies behind this, which is that there is, first of all, at the highest level, widespread cynicism, distrust, and dislike, actually, for the way that politics is conducted in this island. We do not have a great reputation, and the body politic is regarded as problematic in many ways. And one of the ways that you frequently hear, almost every day here, is a version of the idea that there are networks of power and privilege in this island that give more access to power to some people and individuals than to others, and that is indivisible, that you cannot see it. And in that darkness breeds suspicion and fear and negative feelings, negative emotions. And we should have no fear at all about shining a light into that area so that the public can see who it is that ministers mix with, how often they mix with certain people, how often they meet with people and organisations. Who are the people who have access to ministers? Who are those organisations? And I think the Chief Minister put out a terrible red herring when he talked about why only ministers. Well, it's very clear why only ministers. Ministers have power. Ministers make decisions. Ministers move money around. The rest of us don't. I personally would have no problem at all in sharing my diary. But the interest in it is likely to be much, much less than it would be in the interests of a minister who has power. People are not so worried about what backbenchers do in that sense because we don't make those decisions. So I think that's a really unfortunate comment from the Chief Ministers, because it does seem to suggest a sort of a lack of understanding of what lies behind this. And we also heard the argument that, because others do it, we shouldn't necessarily do it here ourselves. And of course, that is absolutely right. We shouldn't necessarily do it here. But we should have a very good reason why we shouldn't, if everybody else is doing it, or a lot of other places are doing it. We shouldn't just say, oh, because we're different, we will do things differently here. There needs to be a precise reason. Why? Why would we not? Why would the people in Jersey not have access to the kind of information that might be available everywhere else? What special reasons are there that might be that they should not be have that light shone into the areas of public debate that they are interested in? And I don't think the case has been made, and I look forward to hearing the case made. Why the people of Jersey should not have access to that information. The point was made, why did we not do this when we were in government? Well, that's an interesting question. We were in government for just under 18 months, 19 months actually, I think. Deputy Adjournment and I talked about doing this very thing quite early on, and we decided not to do it unilaterally. It would be something that we would do, we would felt should be discussed with ministerial colleagues. And obviously we never saw out our term. We never had a chance to sort of see how that would play out. But it was certainly something that was being discussed. And I'm absolutely sure that had we continued in government, we would have, certainly I would have tried to make it come to fruition, because I believe in it. The idea of using freedom of information is a bit risible, because the freedom of information law, it takes a long time for it to take effect. It's over a system that's overwhelmed as it is, and it is not the point. The point is that government should be proactive in being open. It seems to me from the comments paper and from the Chief Minister's speech that everyone is in favour of openness and transparency until it means actually doing something, until it makes teams actually taking a step, making a sacrifice, a small sacrifice. So how difficult would it have been in practice? Certainly I thought about that when I was in government. we each had a private secretary, sometimes shared actually, but private secretaries. And it's a very simple matter to say from now onwards our diaries will be public. However, I want to maintain relevant privacy. Can you advise me, and I will advise you, on which meetings should be redacted or should be recorded in a way that preserves confidentiality and so on. And the Chief Minister says, well, it takes time for all of this to work out, but I think Deputy Alex Curtis has made the point. The government can do this. It can set its own rules. The proposition doesn't say exactly what has to be done. The Chief Minister is entitled to say in response to this proposition, we decided to do it this way. If the Assembly isn't happy with that, further propositions could be brought. But if you really want to do this, it is something that you can do. And it is not hard to do. And similarly, the question of it being January being a bit too soon. Well, I honestly don't think that in this Assembly, if the Chief Minister had stood up and said, look, we think we agree with this proposition, we think January's a bit soon, we would like to bring the first ideas, the first versions of this, maybe one or two ministers doing it to begin with, in January, but then we will, do the whole thing in March. Would anybody in the Assembly have thought that was fundamentally defeating the points of the proposition? I doubt it. I think it could have been done. It is a question of will. And I am surprised that the Council of Ministers has, by default, slipped very casually, it seems to me, into a dismissal of this without appearing, certainly from the Chief Minister's speech, to understand the wellspring of where it comes from. And it's a small step. It's not a hugely radical step. It's a step that loads of other jurisdictions have taken. We could Jerseyfy it in the way that we felt was appropriate, in a very simple and easy ways. It doesn't need PPC to opine on it. It doesn't need non-ministers, I beg your pardon, to have to be sort of dragged in and then duly dragged out again of the whole thing. It just needs commitment and real commitment to openness and transparency. The public deserve to see who is having access to ministers. That is the central point. And doing so might well allay a lot of those suspicions around those supposed networks of power and privilege that mean that people feel that unless you know the right person, that there's all these people getting access to ministers and things are being arranged behind the scenes. Easy to sort out if you have a bit of openness and transparency. I think this is a very, very simple proposition to support, and I hope members will do so.
Much. Deputy Balash.
Sir, I agree with both the previous speakers, and I think it is a rather disappointing response from the government. Openness and transparency are important, and it would have been so easy for the government to have gathered itself some brownie points by accepting the proposition and explaining exactly how it was going to implement it. I accept certainly that there are data protection considerations and that the names of junior officials should not be included, and non-ministerial meetings should probably be excluded. But this surely is all within the province of government to establish. I don't see what on earth this has to do with the Privileges and Procedures Committee. This is governmental business. It's for government to decide how and in what respect it should put information about its business into the public domain. I have to say, despite those remarks, that I am reluctantly not going to support the proposition. And the reason for that is one word. And I hope I'm not being unduly legalistic, but the proposition states in paragraph A that details of all external meetings, all attended by ministers, should be published monthly. And I think that goes too far. I think it's disappointing that the Chief Minister could not have lodged an amendment to this proposition to delete that word or to refine the proposition in some way as to make it absolutely clear that the government retained the right to decide how and in what respect it was going to put this information into the public domain, but it has not. But as I say, reluctantly, I'm not going to support the proposition, but I repeat that I think that this is a disappointing response from a government which purports to be transparent and open in its dealings.
So can I ask a point of order, sir, or a point of clarification?
Well,
either because I'll ask for a clarification if I may.
Would you give way for a point of clarification?
So I just was troubled by. Can I just ask the Speaker if he would accept or otherwise the fact that this is a request of the Chief Minister, and it can therefore, it's not mandatory and we're not passing regulations. I don't understand why, if the all is capable of being interpreted by the government and bringing back a position that is necessarily nugatory, because this is a request. And I just maybe kindly ask the Speaker if I may.
Well, I accept what the Deputy has said. So I think that's a very reasonable point, and perhaps I ought to reconsider my position.
Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir, and I'm sorry I can't be with you this afternoon. I am on childcare duties. Son is ill. The Chief Minister asked why all members shouldn't have to publish their calendars and who they're meeting. One word, Chief Minister and ministers, you have the decision, or one has the decision-making authority, the ultimate decision-making authority. And because of that, that is why this is being asked of ministers and chief ministers. And that word is because of lobbying. We haven't heard it yet. Everyone's scooted, I think, so far in their speeches around using that word. But ultimately, it's about lobbying. And I've actually been in that lobbying sphere in Brussels. There's a huge amount of lobbyists in Brussels. And it's really important to understand who is being lobbied and why, and those decision makers are being lobbied and why. And I think with this proposition, it's actually letting this government or future governments off lightly, because usually behind we see in many jurisdictions, and one that the proposer has listed in the report of her proposition, many governments and the European Commission have to publish their meetings. But why? Because behind it, there's a Lobby Register Act. There's actually a law behind it. It's actually related to those who lobby have to be registered. I myself had to be a registered lobbyist in Brussels to be able to enter the European Commission building or the European Parliament building. And those meetings that I had with either the members of the European Parliament or the Commissioner, if I was granted that privilege of meeting a European Commissioner or high-level officers, were recorded. So this actually proposal is actually, I think, giving quite a lot of leeway for the government to be able to, and as Deputy Joseph, I think, and Deputy Balash in the discussion that was just had, it actually gives a lot of leeway to the government to decide how they want to do it, because there isn't an act behind it. There isn't a legislation behind this. It isn't about the lobbyists having to register, and that being the ones who have to then kind of register, and that's how you that they're then published on a meeting schedule. And I just looked at the latest European Integrity Watch, it's called Integrity Watch EU, where it shows all the commissioners or the cabinet members who are hosting the lobbyists from lobbyist registers, and then it shows the top 10 organisations, and the top one being Business Europe, which of course is a network of the biggest business and corporations in Europe. And the next one down is the European Trade Union Confederation, and the next one down is Google. So it shows it's really important that shows the kind of influence and access that those organisations have. I'm glad to see that WWF is in the top 10. So it's not just about businesses. There is also non-governmental organisations having access as well. But it does able to give an overview of who has access and when, depending on what decisions are about to be made. And give an example for myself as being part of the fair trade movement, so businesses who are conducting trade under fair trade conditions. We were trying to access the Trade Commissioner of the time, Peter Mandelson, with very little success, or very limited success, maybe only one meeting a year or two meetings a year. And yet we had the same kind of business associations having regular meetings with the same trade commissioner. So we were able to use that to show and push for why can't we be meeting the commissioner and put our points across in a business network as much as the others. So I think it's really important to show why why the proposer is asking for this. It's about transparency, but ultimately is it because of who is influencing who. Deputy Renner talked about this, and having been somebody who has been in that sphere, it is really important for that transparency. And again, to put the points across again that Deputy Joseph pulled in that clarification of Deputy Balash's point about all meetings. Actually, this proposal lets the government decide rather than a legislation that would actually prescribe very clearly, and the Assembly would prescribe it very clearly through a legislative act. So I will be supporting this, as I think it's very important proposal. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I don't want to speak at this time, but I need a clarification from yourself on point B, just because of the wording are not very clear to me. And can you clarify for us if by saying details of all off-island travel by ministers and assistant ministers instead of as ministers and assistant ministers would refer of personal capacity, personal travel of those ministers as well?
Well, in theory, yes. I mean, I think ministers and assistant ministers must refer not to specific individuals, but those holding those ministerial offices. And in my view, a proper interpretation in context, although I accept that as a matter of plain English it could go further, but in context I would be minded to interpret that as only in their capacity as ministers and assistant ministers. You don't wish to speak, Deputy Kovac? Conitarbs and Helia.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to interject after a series of Jeremiads about the state of the government, and hopefully to put perhaps a different complexion on how things are going. I certainly don't recognise the views of some of the early speakers talking about the terrible state in which the government is held by the public. I must go to different wellsprings than Deputy Renner, because the feedback I'm getting on the hopper bus at parish lunches and in other places where I meet the community is that they're rather pleased that the new government is getting on with things. And they're certainly well aware of what the new government is getting on with, because there are lots of opportunities for the public to find out. Just to name a few, the quarterly meetings that ministers hold with their scrutiny panels, the generous amount of question time that is allowed in our Parliament, both oral and written, the way that FOI is now being used in particular by the media to find out all kinds of interesting facts, including off-island travel and the cost thereof. And some ministers will have been embarrassed perhaps, or at least taken to task when these figures have been known. I don't think there's any shortage at all of information about what government is doing. At the same time, there's been a deliberate attempt, and it's something that I believe was supported at the last election by the new government, to actually spend less time and less money on spin. The communication department has been reduced in size, and inevitably that's going to involve perhaps a little less time turning out information. It may involve fewer videos of the Chief Minister talking about what he's doing. But certainly as a reader of the local paper, as someone who, I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but I'm certainly well aware of what our ministers are doing, just as a member of the public. I'm not sure the public wants to be told about every single external meeting that ministers and assistant ministers are being involved in, which is what the proposition requires. Now, Deputy O's have tried to reinterpret Part A and say, well, it's only a request. But actually, the request leads, I apologise for the state of my voice, the request leads to a requirement at the end of that first paragraph. It's a request that leads to a requirement that the government must, because it's required, present details of every single external meeting on the website and all off-island travel. And I think that is excessive, and I would encourage Deputy Balash to hold by his initial feeling that this is not going to be a useful amount of information to put in the public domain. I believe that we can rely on the processes we already have in place. I'm sure every minister and assistant minister believes they could do more and they could do better. There is no complacency in the comments by the government. And I would also just add in passing that, of course, the parishes and of course several ministers and assistant ministers are involved as connotabs, are very well aware of the need to keep parishioners involved and to provide parishioners with the opportunities to attend open meetings and so on. So I feel that this is just another attempt by those who were in government to cast aspersions on those who are currently in government and to suggest that they might have done things better. Well, they had their chance, and now I think we must let the current government get on with the good job they're doing. Thank you, sir.
Can I tell? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I rise as the chair of the Machinery of Government PPC sub-panel. Just more to acknowledge that I think that Deputy Balash maybe answered his own question within his statement, where he said well, he's not sure why this needs PPC to look at it, but he thinks that these go too far. So actually, with my panel, we are quite and very willing to work with both government, the bringer of this proposition, to negotiate an area of how far we think that these recommendations should go. I'm glad that I have a very extensive panel. I've also got Deputy Jeune, who's already spoken about the willingness and want to be more open and transparent. I also have other current ministers, assistant ministers, as well as other backbenchers. And so, sir, if the government and the proposer of this proposition are willing to work with my panel, sir, I am prepared to listen.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Actually, it probably will be less than a minute or two. I would like to invite St. Helier Constable to our surgeries that were taking place at the town hall on Fridays. And last Friday we did have a surgery and we did have questions. I mean, one of the questions probably I will pose later to the health minister, because one of the parishioners asked, can you please publish at least quarterly report what's happening with the hospital, how much money spent, and how was the progress. And I said, yeah, hopefully we will have some progress. It's not about what I'm trying to say. We're all welcoming transparency, and there are parishioners who do ask questions. Somebody interested more, somebody interested less. And I assume that each of us has different experience and different parishioners who come to talk to us. I think that Constable really missed the point about this government or that government, and it's government against the government. For me, it's nothing to do with this government, nothing to do with previous governments. If we decided today, each and every government going forward, regardless who is in the government, would need to produce it. And it's not about specific government. It's about transparencies of, and by the way, for the chief minister, I don't have any problem. I will be very happy to publish my diary as the president of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, and it can, if somebody would like to know which meetings I'm having with which stakeholders, I'm more than welcome. So I don't think it's for the PPC, and I do believe it's simple things just to be there, and if people would like to see it, they will see it.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I heard the proposer of the proposition refer to the lack of trust that there is in the States Assembly, which has been an ongoing situation for quite a while, which I don't believe either the current government can claim responsibility and perhaps neither the previous one. But I do think that there is a general problem that can be perceived in the public where we might have posturing over problem solving. And the important thing I think about trust is that one has a consideration of the ethics that actually govern the conduct of this assembly. And also that the public see a productive use of time. And I can absolutely assure the States Assembly, having been in the Council of Ministers meeting that considered this proposition, a lot of time was spent trying to understand it. I often say that, or its actual objective, often I have said in scrutiny, just what's the problem statement here? What is the problem that this is trying to solve? And Deputy Shern mentioned, this is about lobbying, but I personally didn't see that word mentioned in that proposition. And that if it is about lobbying, then I think there are ways of dealing with that. Why would we just be talking about meetings? Why not phone calls? That, you know, these are the questions that we seriously kind of were considering to think, right, okay, what are we trying to do here? And what was meant, I mean, perhaps it's unfortunate that the proposition referred to external meetings and off-island travel. So, does that mean off-island meetings when we talk about external meetings? Or do we mean meetings that aren't in the government building? I mean, it just was not particularly clear. And that's the point at which it was suggested, well, maybe the thing to do was to suggest that the Machinery of Government panel look at this on behalf of the whole of the States Assembly. And not through deflection, but to actually have genuine consideration. I will state that I am actually a member of that panel, and I have been honoured to serve Tom Coles in this capacity as chair, and that serious consideration has been given to the matters that have been brought to the group's attention. I also have some ministerial responsibility for data protection, so I'm very much concerned and aware of that balance between privacy and actually being able to disclose information. There have been references to other jurisdictions. The proposition referred to Australia. Now, Australia doesn't actually disclose what they call internal meetings. New Zealand does. Again, what's meant by that? Why was this particular jurisdiction honed in on? And I invite the proposer to answer that. Why this Australia as an example of excellence rather than New Zealand? So Because if you're going to suggest that something is done, and if you're going to suggest that it's going to be value for money, do say exactly, specifically what you are trying to do. And I do believe that would be helpful to the Miscellaneous Government panel in its deliberations should you do. But we do have this issue that we are a small island as well, and that it is quite easy to set hairs running. So that is another thing to be borne in mind when you are disclosing who you're meeting with and whether they're going to be open and what interpretation can be given to it. I do think it does require careful thought. So I just hope, and ultimately the States Assembly is the ultimate decision maker. I will stress that, not the Council of Ministers. They answer to the States Assembly. And that was another reason, I believe, where the Privileges and Procedures Committee and the Miscellaneous Government Sub-Panel does have a place in that. So I would, I therefore won't be supporting the former Chief Minister's proposition, and but in not supporting it, it is on the basis that I support the Miscellaneous Government panel looking into it more to come up with something which perhaps is a bit more solution focused. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I had a question for you, sir, on standing orders, if that's possible.
Well, you're asking me for a ruling on a point of order, so...
Thank you, sir.
What is the point of order?
Standing Order 85, proposal to move to next. Thank you. Standing Order 85, proposal to move to next item. Given members have highlighted some of them, their broad agreement with this, albeit some challenges. If a member were to bring a proposal to move to next item under Standing Order 85, when an item moves, when we move to an item, does that reopen the ability, like we debated on the reference back, for members to bring amendments to fix the small issues that they might have highlighted? So, and if not, if this is defeated, does Standing Order 20 Part 3 apply, which is a proposition cannot be the same or substantially the same, and would that prevent the Machinery of Government subcommittee bringing anything in the next 3 months?
I think the position is that if there's a proposition to move to the next item, then if that proposition is accepted by the Assembly, debate immediately ceases, then the next item is called, and it is possible that this matter is brought back for debate, and it can be brought back with amendments in the usual way. That, I think, is what the procedural position is. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Thank you, sir.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think this proposition misses one very, to me, quite obvious point. The proposition suggests that backbenchers and the public are interested in what ministers do. In my experience, the public and ministers are quite interested in what everybody does. They are interested. I have certainly had friends commenting on backbenchers' travel to things like CPA. They are very, very interested in what we all do. as our ministers. I'd be quite interested to know what some of the backbenchers are up to from time to time. For example, let me give you an example. Not that long ago, we were told by Deputy Gardner that Deputy Moore was not in the Assembly because she was absent on State's business. The following day, she was still absent on State's business, and when pressed as to the reason, we were told that Deputy Moore was attending a workshop arranged by the Speaker of the House of Commons. Now that to me sounds quite fascinating, and I'd be quite interested to know what that workshop was all about, but that information hasn't been shared with us. Backbenchers do travel, and if the states are paying, then that should also be reported on a regular basis. So we are entitled to know, everybody should know where people are travelling and what they're doing. Ministers may well be lobbied, but it's quite clear, if you look at some of the amendments being brought forward, that backbenchers are also lobbied by external organisations and perhaps lobby others, as do scrutiny panels. Constables may be lobbied by people within their own parishes and more widely. My biggest issue, I have two main issues with this. One, what is an external meeting? If I go for lunch with a friend and they tell me at length about issues they've had, and they're not necessarily asking me to do anything, but they just tell me at length about issues they've had with tax or social security, and I come back and ask the team to perhaps address that particular issue, is that a meeting that has to be declared when it's been completely informal and a casual conversation? When I go to a business meeting, as I did quite recently, and at the end of it, someone draws me one side and says, here's a bit of an issue, can you help it? It needs to be sorted, and I arrange a meeting to help sort it. Does that all have to be declared? We have lots of informal conversations, and some of those we then take forward by way of action, others we may tell people about them. But this will create work, compiling lists of meetings, who attended, dealing with issues of confidentiality. It will add to the burden of the ministerial support staff. And we've also talked about, I think the Deputy mentioned, we need more communication. Does she suggest that we go and re-recruit the people that have been made redundant recently from the comms team, who we've heard for some time are far too big and far too bloated, and we don't need all these comms team. If we are going to communicate more, then we need more people in comms. So I don't think this goes far enough. I think it needs to capture everybody. I think there is no reason why backbenchers should not publish their diaries, subject to exactly the same rules as to confidentiality and purpose. And there is no reason why all travel by any member of this Assembly should not be reported, perhaps by the GREF, but that will then create more work for the GREF to capture all that information and publish it if it's not done already. APF, CPA, there are lots of things that the public are very interested in, and those should not be ignored. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, a number of years ago, one of my election slogans was, if anyone's interested.
Was that the election slogan, was it, Deputy?
That's not a usual requisite, of course, for me to make a speech that anyone would be interested. But I used the alliteration. It said basically vote Tadier for trust, transparency and teamwork, not necessarily in that order. And those are three principles which are still important to me. I find myself a little bit in the same position as Deputy Balash here, because I think the principle is absolutely clear. That what we have in front of us is a call for greater transparency and information to be put out in the public domain by the proposer. There are two things I would say, first of all, or let's say the first thing I would say is to respond to Deputy Miller. I think there is a difference between government and backbenchers. I think government enjoy a higher level of autonomy in terms of, for example, their spending, whilst states members travel, for example, and conferences that we attend or workshops might be of public interest, and it's quite right that they should be. We don't decide to do that off our own bat. There's normally an application process, and we go to do a specific piece of work, which is both part of our corporate, of our professional development, and also because we've been asked to engage in various seminars and represent Jersey and the Assembly at those places. And it is right that we do get FOI requests as to the spending for those. But government ministers can decide, I'm not going to say at a whim, but they can decide that they want to travel to attend in a much more in a much more autonomous way than backbenchers ever can. I don't know why, but somebody sent me some information and it explained about actually how much ministers can spend. And they sent me an article from the 30th of June 2017. And it's quite remarkable that there was one minister at the time who between 2014 and 2016, I won't name anyone, but the Bailiwick Express reported that the former minister spent £52,000 or £52,745 on his states card, with more than a fifth of that, so £11,000 used to pay for goods and services, many personal, which he later refunded. So it's a remarkable amount of money, and I know that's a saga which has been well publicised, and I think it is important that ministers, whether now, because this is going to apply to not just current ministers, it will apply to ministers in the future when they are spending money on their state's credit cards, which ordinary backbenchers incidentally don't have. So I think there is a distinction there to be made as well, that it is a matter of public interest. But I think the next point to say is that I think it's really important that the value of what government does and backbenchers do is also publicised, because that's the harder message which is to get out. So the media are often quite interested in the financial bottom line that is spent, but less so on what it's spent for. And I think this is where the idea of publishing meetings is correct. It may be something of a procedural technicality, but the first question that is asked during question time in the House of Commons is what is the Prime Minister's plans for the day? And it's not asking if he's going to go out for lunch and have a cream tea somewhere around Westminster. It's what are your meetings for the day? And he will give normally quite a generic answer. But I think symbolically that's quite important, because there has been a presumption, I think, all around the world and in parliaments and for ministers to be more transparent and more open. And so I could look at this and say, actually, there are a couple of words here that I don't like. What we have to remember in this, that actually the spirit of what we're voting on today, as in the previous debate, is one of principle, and one of the principle here at stake is transparency. And it really does ask the ministers to go away and say, well, look, what can you put in the public domain? And I think this whole concept of undue influence is one that is absolutely critical, that Deputy Reniff touched on. And I think there, of course, will be a balance to be struck between, we wouldn't expect ministers to simply publish meetings and details of who they're meeting with if it's, for example, on a constituency basis. We recognise the fact that they're not just ministers, they also are constituency representatives or parish representatives in some cases. And so the confidentiality about who you meet with, I think there's a balance to be struck there, and sometimes the purpose of the meeting could actually straddle business interests versus personal interests. And of course, we know that whoever comes to talk to us, they'll be trying to influence us potentially in one way or another. Sometimes it's to do something for them very legitimately on a personal basis, to do with the States Department they're trying to interact with, or it could be to do with more personal financial interests. And I think that latter point is what needs to be drawn out about how government, it's right that government talks to all sorts of people and it listens to businesses, for example, that might seek to influence us. We've seen this, for example, in the wind farm, you know, where people, and that line between people who are often experts in certain areas often also have a financial interest, and the two do overlap. So for what it's worth, ma'am, sir, you changed quickly.
I know.
There must be a telephone box somewhere.
Blink and you miss it.
For what it's worth, I'm willing to give government the opportunity to come back I'm willing to support this proposition and for government to come back and say actually what they can realistically do, because, you know, it's not ideal, but we know that government actually often takes backbench propositions and saying, you know what, we can't quite do that, but we think we can do this. And I suspect in reality there'll be some discussion between the mover of this proposition the Chief Minister and PPC as necessary to find out what's reasonable and practical and what meets the spirit of what we're voting for today.
Well, does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I've taken some notes as speakers have contributed in this debate, some phrases that stuck out to me. The first one I want to start with was said by Deputy Renouf, who said that the case had not been made to why the public shouldn't have access to this information. And there's a really simple reason why that case hasn't been made, and it's because it's not the case of the government that the public shouldn't have this information. It seems to me the case of the government is that more transparency is good and right, so let's do it properly, and let's not do it to a timetable which, if my calculation is correct, would give us 12 days to put this regime in place. And that is why the suggestion which has come from government is that the PPC Machinery of Government Subcommittee ought to look at it. That's a committee made up of both government and non-government members, chaired by Deputy Coles, who I have absolute faith in to do a good job on this. He's somebody who I think is very good at coming up with practical solutions to practical problems. I look at what the proposition is asking for. Details of all off-island travel by ministers and assistant ministers. No problem with that. That ought to be a given. There is already a regime in place for doing that. I don't think it's always necessarily been followed through in the past, and that needs to be improved, and that ought to just become business as usual. That's fine. Details of all external meetings attended by ministers and assistant ministers to be published monthly in arrears on the government website. Well, again, I'm completely fine with that in principle. In fact, I have to confess, a few years ago, I briefly considered bringing a proposition to the Assembly to achieve the same thing. And the problem there, though, is that whilst it's absolutely right that we have some form of publication that says what official meetings ministers and assistant ministers have been having, the problem is, what about the unofficial meetings and the other forms of communication that we get that would actually technically meet the spirit of what this proposition is trying to get at? Deputy Gardner mentioned her constituency surgeries. I've been doing constituency surgeries more or less every week for the last 4 years now. And I've found recently, surprise, surprise, that some people come to my constituency surgery who aren't constituents, but who want to talk to me about housing stuff. And I've tried to keep my constituency business separate to my ministerial business, so my private secretary doesn't attend my constituency surgeries with me. And so if it's to be the case that people wanting to access me in my ministerial capacity without having to go through getting a proper appointment booked in the diary, but to just drop in an informal context, they may be contributing at that meeting the exact kind of things that we would want to be transparently noted down somewhere else. I can easily have a constituency surgery, somebody who is actually there to lobby on a political issue come to me, or someone who wants to speak specifically about a housing thing. Now, if it's to be the case that that ought to be included in the scope, then I need a process in place to do that, because that's very different to what I've done with constituency surgeries in the last few years, because they've been a very informal thing, literally for a long time, just me sat in a cafe, ready to hear whoever wants to come and talk to me. But if that's to be a forum that in some shape or form needs to be in the scope of this so that there is genuine transparency, we need to think about it. Otherwise, we run the risk of an informal system arranging, notes not properly being taken, things not properly being filed into the system, which will give rise to all sorts of inadvertent breaches of the Code of Conduct, which would be in nobody's interest to make that overcomplicated. And of course, we get spoken to at all sorts of engagements that we attend for other reasons. We get invited to functions or other events, and people who may see us there went, oh, since you're here, I'll have a chat about something, and it might be directly to do with the ministerial portfolio. Again, how do we record that and make sure that it's included in the scope of this? These are legitimate questions to consider, and I don't think 12 days is long enough for that. Deputy Jeune, I didn't get the exact wording for what she says, but I think the gist of it, for why she suggested that it was right that this apply with priority to ministers and assistant ministers, is because we're decision makers, or everybody in this assembly is a decision maker, and ultimately any ministerial decision can be overridden by this assembly. And we know that there are people who, quite fairly in a democratic society, go to speak to their local representatives because they want to lobby them on a political issue that's important to them. It's not just casework, it's political lobbying. Some people do that as individuals, and some people do it in a capacity with a particular organisation that they're involved in, an organisation which may have a vested interest in the subject that they want to discuss them with. And those members can vote on those issues in the Assembly, exert influence, and ultimately decide what the law of the land is. So should not there be some consideration as to what scope that features into it? Because we are all decision makers, and this Assembly is the sovereign decision-making body of the island, not the Council of Ministers, which only has responsibilities that this Assembly decides we have, and it can overrule our decisions anyway. So it's not right to say that, to suggest that backbenchers or scrutiny chairs or people in other capacities shouldn't be included in the scope of this at all. I think I'll leave it at that, sir. There were a few points made in the opening remarks which did make me grin a little bit because of the sense of irony I did pick up from them, but I don't want to make too much of a point about that, because there is a constructive way forward here, which is that this proposition is taken off the table in one way or another. One member suggested a way that that could be helpfully done. The proposer of the proposition could ask leave for the Assembly to withdraw it and then be brought into the tent with government and with the machinery of government sub-panel to talk about how we get the intentions behind this put forward in a decent system that we can have confidence will be implemented and is fit for purpose as soon as possible. But doing it in these strict terms, with 12 working days of this year left before the deadline is met for this, when there are so many other things to consider where they don't fall into the scope of parts A and B on this, just strikes me as a much more sensible and pragmatic way forward. And so I would urge members to give consideration to that way forward, rather than strictly what is being asked for to vote in favour of this proposition, given all the implications that would have.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I have checked. I believe 12 members have spoken so far. I believe the convention is typically 10 members of a diverse range of the Assembly, and as such, I would like to propose under Standing Order 85, a proposal to move to the next item under leave that you judge, sir, that 85.2, the presiding officer shall not allow the proposal if it appears to him or her that it is an abuse of the minority. The reason I'd like to check if it is valid right now to bring that, sir.
You're asking for leave to bring a proposition to move to the next item. The position is that a significant number have spoken. Indeed, 12 people have spoken. In my view, therefore, it is not prejudicial to the rights of a minority. Sufficient number of people have been allowed to speak. The proposition is therefore in order. Is it seconded?
Yes, sir.
I put it now to the vote without debate. There is no debate on this proposition. So the position is that I invite members to return to their seat. We'll do it on the appel. A vote pour means that we will move to the next item, and this proposition will stop being debated and we'll move on to the next thing. A vote contre means we continue with the debate. So with that in mind, I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. And I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted, 34 votes for, 10 votes contre, 1 abstention. Accordingly, we move now to the next item of public business.
We have the 10, please, sir, and the abstention.
So those voting contra, the Conotabs of St Lawrence and St Brallard, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Gorst, Balash, Catherine Curtis, Kovac, and the Conotab of St Juan and Deputy Borek. And Deputy Ozef abstained.
We now move to the Draft Limited Partnerships Jersey Amendment Law P.73, lodged by the Minister for External Relations. The main responder will be the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Limited Partnerships Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to make minor amendments to the Limited Partnerships Jersey Law 1994. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the draft amendment law proposes amendments to the Limited Partnerships Jersey Law 1994, which I'll refer to as convenience for the LP law. Historically, the bankruptcy of a general partner of a limited partnership has always been included in Article 24 of the LP law. However, this only covers terminal bankruptcy proceedings using the interpretation Jersey Law 1954 definition of bankruptcy, which ultimately results in the final winding up of the company. Article 24 of the LP law was amended in 2022 to permit not only body corporates to be general partners to limited partnerships, but also unincorporated bodies. The terms termination and insolvency were included in some of the 2022 amendments, but it is now unclear to officials and members of the industry who were engaged in the legislation and policy development at the time as to why insolvency was also included in the final version adopted by the states. Insolvency is defined in Jersey legislation as cash flow insolvency under Article 11 of the Bankruptcy Disaster Jersey Law 1990. This means that an entity is deemed to be insolvent when it is unable to pay its debts as they fall due. As a result of the insertion of the word insolvency to the LP law in 2022, the cash flow insolvency of a general partner now results in the automatic winding up of a limited partnership. However, it can be difficult to establish from a factual perspective at what point the general partner becomes cash flow insolvent. Many alternative investment fund limited partnerships have special purpose vehicle general partners who often rely on injections of capital as necessary from their parent company. The way in which such SPV partners operate, receiving funds as required, is a common feature of such structures relating to cash management and are not indicative of insolvency or lack of funds. It is therefore an unappealing technicality that a general partner could, under the current law, become temporarily insolvent whilst awaiting a further capital injection. The difficulty in establishing cash flow insolvency of a general partner is undesirable from a commercial and legal perspective, causing uncertainty in respect of timing of an event which would trigger the winding up of the limited partnership. As part of the continuing work to ensure that the legislative framework supports the needs of the funds and private wealth sectors of our financial services industry, these amendments are being proposed. They are essentially a matter of housekeeping supported by industry representatives. Thank you, sir.
The principle seconded.
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? No member wishes to speak on the principles? Very well. Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show.
Have the appel, please, sir.
Appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P73. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted, 39 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Chadier, I think, who isn't around and about. Deputy Southern, you're a member of the Economic International Affairs. He's not there. We've got yes, Deputy Wilson. Is the panel by any chance calling this in?
No, sir, it's not. Thank you.
Very much indeed. Very well. How do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading?
Sir, may I propose provisions of the amendment law en bloc, please?
Are they seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in second reading? If no member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. I assume the appel is called for, and I ask members to return to their seats. The vote is in the adoption of the law in second reading. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in second reading, 41 votes for, no votes contra, no abstention. Do you move in third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Oakley.
Very briefly, sir, it's a season of goodwill, and I think one should take the opportunity of saying what a wonderful job the Financial Services Minister and Treasury Minister is doing. She's an expert in this subject, and I'm sure that it'll go very well. And that's probably not in order, but I'm going to say it anyway. Thank you, through the chair, to thank the Minister.
So are you arguing that we should adopt the law in second or third reading, or not?
Overwhelming yes.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond. Difficult question.
Sir, I thank the Deputy for his kind comments, which I'm sure are appreciated by myself, by the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services and all of the Financial Services team. It is nice to know that they are appreciated, and I absolutely agree they are doing a sterling job. And I propose the law, sir.
And I assume the appel is called for.
Yes, sir.
The vote is on the adoption of the law in third reading, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have the opportunity of casting their vote, then ask the greffier to close the voting. And the law has been adopted in third reading, 41 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Very well. The next is the draft Employment and Discrimination Tribunal Jersey Amendment Regulations, P.65, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The main responder is the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Employment and Discrimination Tribunal Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 82 of the Employment Jersey Law 2003.
Sir, I believe I've got to declare an interest. My wife earns some of her money from sitting on these panels.
Yes. Sorry, I'm going to have to look at what it's actually asking for now. I'm afraid things have speeded up a little bit as to whether that takes you out of the game or not. Deputy, one moment. Yes, I think that is that is a potential pecuniary advantage, and therefore you should not be taking part. Thank you for that declaration. Thank you. Very well. I ask the greffier to read the citation. Sorry? You did? You see, it's going far too fast for me now. Yes. Time to retire. Yes. Minister.
Thank you, sir. The purpose of this very brief amendment is to tidy up the provision in regulations which relates to the way in which new rates of remuneration for members of the Employment and Discrimination Tribunal are set. The current position is that the rates of remuneration are set out in the regulations, but there is no power within the regulations themselves for those rates to be amended. To confuse matters further, the regulations contain an order-making power for the Minister to set new rates of remuneration. I have recently exercised my order-making power to increase the rates, which had remained at the level set out in the regulations for many years. There is clearly an anomaly which needs to be fixed. The draft amendment cures this anomaly by removing the rates from the regulations but preserving the order-making power for the Minister to determine the new rates. As the explanatory note makes clear, this will prevent out-of-date rates in the regulations conflicting with the rates set out in the order. Sir, in my view, this is a common sense and uncontroversial change, and I maintain the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? No member wishes to speak on the principles. I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show.
Appel, please, sir.
Appel is called for. And I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 41 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Doublé, does your panel wish to call the matter in?
No, thank you, sir.
How do you wish to deal in second readings?
En bloc, please.
Are the regulations seconded for second reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in second reading? No member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show.
Appel, please, sir.
Appel is called for. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is in the second reading. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations are adopted in second reading. 42 votes for, no votes contra, no abstention. Do you move in third reading, Minister?
Yes, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading?
Sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading? Then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in third reading kindly show. It's called for. I was passed a note by the greffier a few moments ago saying, don't assume. So far the evidence is not counting in that way. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is in third reading. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations have been adopted in third reading. 42 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. We are now moved to amendment to standing orders, miscellaneous amendments, P.76, lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to make the following amendments to the standing orders of the States of Jersey with immediate effect.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I believe that the report with this proposition is extremely clear and uncontroversial. However, I may be proved wrong during the debate. These amendments as standing orders include a number of minor changes identified by PPC. The committee has agreed that, in future, amendments such as these should be grouped together in this way and brought for debate at the end of each session in December and July. These particular amendments will remove provisions that are now out of date or that do not reflect current practice, including the following. The minimum lodging period for a proposition to remove a minister. This is now a power which the Chief Minister has, and the provision in standing orders is redundant. The terms of reference for PPC will be updated to remove responsibility for freedom of information and engagement about the work of the Council of Ministers, both of which now clearly fall within the responsibilities of the government. An existing provision for a weekly publications list to be produced by the States Gref would be removed. This is no longer current practice and is redundant given the existence of the States Assembly website. These amendments will also update the titles of ministers in standing orders to reflect those currently used. And finally, a change will be made to the process that applies when the Assembly selects the chairs of various committees and panels. This last change stems from a suggestion made to the committee by Deputy Tadyer. At present, when there is a selection process required to appoint a chair, the candidates speak in the order of which they are nominated. In order to ensure that no perceived advantage comes from being the first nominated, in future the speaking order would be determined by lots, as already happens when the Assembly selects the Chief Minister. This change would not apply to ministerial elections, however, where the Chief Minister's nominees would continue to speak first. But it would apply to all the chairs covered by standing orders. Thank you, sir.
Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? No member wishes to speak on the proposition? Then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting, kindly show.
Can we have the appel, please?
We're very close to becoming a choir.
You know, sir, I did stand up to ask for the appel.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats and I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the adoption of P.76. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 43 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is draft single-use plastics, etc. restrictions Jersey Amendment Law P.67, lodged by the Minister for Infrastructure. The main responder is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft single-use plastics, etc. restrictions, Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the single-use plastics, etc. restrictions, Jersey Law 2021, to prohibit importing and supplying single-use vapes by traders and individuals, to add categories of prohibited carrier bags and for connected purposes. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. So this draft amendment law, if adopted, would meet a commitment that I made along with the Environment Minister to address the environmental impact of single-use vapes. Accordingly, the amended law would implement a ban on single-use vapes in Jersey. Our neighbours in England, Scotland, Wales, Guernsey and France have all similarly either announced plans or agreed legislation to ban single-use vapes in their jurisdictions. In my view, sir, and I hope members will agree, it is right for Jersey to be aligned with them, and this legislation would indeed put us ahead of some other countries. The proposed ban will apply to individuals and traders, prohibiting the importation and supply of single-use vapes on the island. By their nature, sir, they are not designed to be refilled or recharged. They are a disposable device designed for a limited lifespan and are typically used and thrown away within a few days. This is a misuse of the finite resources that are required to manufacture these devices, as well as creating a waste stream which is problematic and costly to manage. So I'm conscious of questions or arguments that might be made regarding individual freedoms and liberty. This is a government intervention to ban a product, and that might not rest easy with some philosophical outlooks. But we are not banning vaping. There are various alternative devices available which will allow people to continue to vape should they choose to do so. So the freedom and liberty to choose to vape, and by association to choose actively damage one's health, remains open to Irelanders over the age of 18. On balance, sir, and with the alternative options available, it is a proportionate measure to ban single-use vapes, given the immediate environmental benefit that will accrue to all Irelanders, regardless of whether they vape or not. So this policy and this draft legislation has been developed across government and following consultation. We've involved the waste and recycling team in my department, trading standards, customs, health and treasury. A consultation ran for 6 weeks at the end of March this year, engaging supermarkets, convenience stores, forecourts, specialist vape shops, through an online survey and stakeholder meetings. Relevant representative bodies were also contacted. When we consider the time that will be required for this legislation to come into force, it is likely that it will have taken 12 months between our first engagement with retailers and the eventual enactment of this legislation, if approved. So the purpose of the Single-Use Plastics Law is to reduce waste, increase reuse, and support our carbon-neutral strategy. It is therefore appropriate that a ban on single-use vapes, which has the aim of seeking to address the environmental damage they cause, is delivered through an amendment to this legislation. So I'm happy to cover the specific details of the law at second reading. In summary, though, the law prohibits the importation and supply of single-use vapes by individuals and traders. That therefore outlaws any form of trade of single-use vapes to and within Jersey. A single-use vape is defined as being a vape that is not intended to be reused, refilled, recharged, or have its coil replaced in the normal course of use. There are no exemptions to the proposed ban, save that single-use refills in rechargeable devices will still be allowed. These single-use refill pods are required in certain settings, mainly for security purposes, and are an easier refill than manually refilling a tank with an e-liquid. There are some members of our community who need to use these single-use pods in order to vape. To outlaw these as well would, in our view, have been an overly impact on accessibility and ultimately their right to vape should they wish. It is for that reason that the legislation makes this one minor exemption. In terms of enforcement, sir, this new legislation will clearly require enforcement, in this instance by customs and by trading standards. Illegal or banned goods can and will be seized by customs at our ports of entry. Traders can also be issued with a prohibition notice, failure with which to comply would lead to a fine of up to £1,000. So we will be enforcing this legislation if it is adopted, but there is no provision to make criminals out of this legislation. A fine is the extent of the sanction proposed. I believe this recourse is proportionate for this type of offence were it to take place. I am assured, sir, that these will in any event be the final steps in the enforcement process. We will be engaging, explaining, encouraging first. Penalties will only be incurred if this approach fails. Before closing, sir, I'd like to thank the Environment and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel for their engagement and challenge on this issue, which has been helpful to me and my officers. I appreciate the panel's comments, and we of course share the ambition for further progress in reducing the use of disposable items and finding a way of keeping on top of developments in the use of materials. Sir, should members adopt the draft law today, the process for royal assent and royal court registration will then commence. The legislation then requires a commencement order from the Minister, which allows to ensure that everything is in place to proceed and gives clarity to all parties as to when the ban on importation and supply will begin. I move the principles, sir.
Thank you very much, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And I'm welcoming this legislation coming forward, and I'm grateful for the Minister for Infrastructure and Minister for Environment. It was a commitment. And actually, I'm thinking that it moved much faster than the first legislation for the single-use bans that we started to debate. So, for me, especially when I look at the numbers of the young people, 58% of year 12 tried e-vapes. And I remember visiting Horace School when the school council said, the young people smoking, what are you doing? And it was just under a year ago, and here we are, we're introducing this and hope it will be introduced quicker. So I'm really, really welcoming it. I think if I'm going from the smoke to the single-use plastic, I think this assembly came a long way, and I'm looking to the ex-Minister for Infrastructure, Constable of St. Xavier, when I remember the first engagement and the first meeting with the officers that said, we never ban anything in Jersey, Deputy, why do you want to ban? And here we are, we have primary legislation that we can add things, move things quicker when we feel it's really, really important. And by the way, thank you for the Minister for Constable St. Xavier, because it took 2.5 years, but we are where we are, and we have good primary legislation that we can continue to adopt. I would encourage ministers to look for further, as we know that other jurisdictions use this type of legislation and improve the environment. So thank you again, and I'll be supporting.
Very much, Deputy Reynolds.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to congratulate the government and ministers for bringing this. I think it is an excellent piece of work. It's been done in a timely fashion. And it is good to see continuity across administrations on issues where there is widespread agreement in society. And I would just like to note that. I would say I was proud to announce the first steps towards this when I was minister, along with the then infrastructure minister, Deputy Binet. We made that announcement when we were in the first year of our office, I think, maybe just after. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the then Chief Minister in doing that. I think that symbolises the fact that there has been widespread agreement around the aims and ambitions of this. I think I come at this obviously primarily from, or first at least, from an environmental perspective. And of course, what we're talking about here is a product that uses an element, lithium, that is vital in the supply of well, it's vital for the development of battery technology, current battery technology, and the electrification of the economy that is proceeding as part of the net zero agenda. And the problem, of course, with single-use vapes in this context is that they are a total waste of that element. They take mined element, break it up into micro fragments, put them in a single-use product, which is then either put into landfill or burnt or otherwise lost. And I suppose what I would like to make the point is that this is part of a bigger picture of the need to move to a circular economy. We need to do that both as an island with scarce resources, and the more we can reuse, the better. Certainly in terms of elements and building materials and wood and so on, that these are principles that apply well beyond this particular piece of legislation. I think it's an expression of a wider philosophy that I hope is becoming more embedded, and certainly I think is also reflective of traditional Jersey values of self-sufficiency and so on. But it's also true, of course, as a global level. We would, if we didn't pass this, we would be part of a weak link, if you like, where we would be allowing the destruction of elements that are of critical importance. That would not be good, not be a good look. It would also not be good for the planet. And so I wholeheartedly support this from an environmental perspective. I do also come at it from the health perspective. I'm very well aware with teenage sons of the attractions of the single-use vapes as a product marketed at children as a gateway into potentially into smoking. and for that reason, and also relatively cheap, and therefore accessible. And so from the health perspective as well, I think that we have every reason to do this, and I think it's therefore a piece of proportionate and sensible regulation. And as I say, I would like to congratulate the relevant ministers for bringing this forward.
Very much, Deputy Adjournment.
Sir, I will keep this short, and I'm speaking as the chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure panel. The panel is very supportive of the aim of this amendment to enact a ban on single-use vapes, and so we urge members to support this timely amendment. This is a step, as the Minister said in his opening speech, that many jurisdictions are also about to or have ban single-use vapes, and so we are following those other jurisdictions in understanding the impact of single-use vapes. Many people have already spoken, many members have already spoken about why it's important to move to ban vapes, especially because of the lithium battery and the metals that are used within the single-use vapes, and that huge challenges of recycling rubbish and littering. We went as a panel to Le Colette to see the recycling area, and we saw the where they possible to have the collection of single-use vapes. There is a big pile of trying to work out what to do with those single-use vapes and the small lithium batteries within them. So I think it's very important to understand that impact. And as Deputy Renouf just said, it's very attractive to young people, and with disposable vapes being cheaper and the flavours being more frequently designed to appeal to young people, it's really important that we do this ban. So I hope that this ban not only is now, but also that the government looks at this from a public health perspective, and extends this for health reasons as well, and looks at it from the health impact beyond this specific legislation, amendment to the legislation. So the panel would just like to hear from the Minister on whether there is a potential to widen this legislation further for in the future to include other disposable products, and also if there are any steps taken to ensure that there are changes in materials, that if any changes in materials used by manufacturers of vapes will be captured by this or subsequent amendments, legislation changes, so that the legislation continues to be fit for purpose. We hear already that vape manufacturers are adapting the material of the vapes to try to get around some of these bans that have come in other jurisdictions and bigger jurisdictions. So the panel would just want to hear from the Minister on that, how wide this legislation can capture those kind of changes in material. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Hall.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank everyone who's helped to bring this ban. It is especially good for the health of our young people. Vaping was introduced to help those trying to give up smoking, and it seems to have morphed into something with the bubblegum flavours, brightly coloured, cherry, that's really been very attractive to our young people. And so I think this is a really positive move, an action from this government to really help our young people and also to help our environment. And I thank the Minister very much for bringing it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Oser.
Thank you, sir. I would like to take this opportunity of thanking the incredible staff at the Le Colette Recycling Centre who will be implementing this. I have had the occasion of having to go down there to do lots of deliveries, and I must say, each time that I have been down there struggling with all sorts of items, whether they be reusable vapes or otherwise, they have been fantastic. And I'm sure that they will take this in the spirit in which this Assembly is going to give endorsement of them. And I really think that what Jersey does and what those individuals, they know who they are, some of which I think have recently celebrated 30 years of service in the thing. I know that those individuals down there will appreciate this Assembly's absolute support and commitment to doing what they do, and give them the opportunity of having a shout out for once. And I hope that's appropriate, sir.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I am supporting this on balance. I think it's the right thing to do for many reasons that have already been outlined, but I think there are some considerations that need to be put on record. The first thing is I think that this product wouldn't be being banned if it weren't for the overriding health considerations. I think the prime driver for this is health, not because we care about reducing plastics, because otherwise we would be also looking at plastic cups, we'd be looking at the vast multitude of waste that is produced by our supermarkets, and which doesn't seem to have changed, even though the message has long got out that plastics and excessive wrapping is not a good thing. And so I don't want to make this speech about whataboutism, but I would put the question to the Minister about those other products, and in fact, to what extent and what other products are on the list for banning, because I think we need to be honest about what this is about. I think that the prime driver for this is health, and I think that's right, but it adds confusion when it's being brought forward by the Minister for Infrastructure as something within the single-use plastics law, because I suspect if it wasn't a vape, if it was just a single-use plastic which contained coffee, and there's lots of examples, I think, of coffee and tea being issued in single-use plastic cups, even when they don't need to be. I've been in cafes where I'm quite happy to sit down, and it seems to be standard now to issue in non-reusable cups just for convenience. I think that needs to be addressed equally. We also need to consider whether or not there are going to be unintended consequences. So I don't think it's a reason not to vote for this, but vapes are clearly an alternative to cigarettes. And young people, hopefully most young people, will not wish to try either cigarettes or vapes. But if single-use vapes, if they can't get their hands on them, will they consider going back to cigarettes? Will it be single-use cigarettes that are passed around the bike sheds at the schools or on the beach fronts, wherever they are, rather than vapes? And what are the consequences for that? Are cigarettes worse than vapes? I think they are, on balance. And of course, you can get hold of cigarettes probably in bigger quantities, and you can, if you come from a family which smokes, you can probably easily steal a couple of cigarettes off your parents. Single-use vapes, I think, are clearly a currency, if that's the right. Or a phenomenon with some young people. Is the message actually that we want young people who are vaping to use rechargeable vapes? Is that the message that government's giving out in banning single-use vapes, or are we saying that they shouldn't vape at all? And what's the relationship between young people and those and that possibility? And lastly, sir, again, it is whataboutism, but I will raise the issue of single-use cigarettes. Because all cigarettes are single use, and when they get thrown away, the cigarette butts have something called cellulose acetate in it, which is a form of plastic. It is somewhat biodegradable, but the estimates are that it can take anywhere from 18 months to a number of years for those cigarette butts to degrade. It's not possible to recycle them, and they end up in the sewage system, often in the beach, and affect the wildlife, as well as having to be cleaned up in our capital and elsewhere. What consideration is being given to that, given that both young people and old people can smoke single-use cigarettes, and without any consequence of being able to, for littering? I think that needs to be looked into. Is the idea that maybe we should be encouraging pipes to come back into fashion? I know that there's some great examples of statesmen, as they probably were, on both sides of the political divide in the UK, who were iconic with their pipes. So I can think of a great socialist as well as a great wartime leader who had those pipes. And the beauty of a pipe is it's reusable. So if the driver is not health, but actually to reduce single-use items which contain plastic. Maybe the DFI Minister should be banging the drum for bringing back pipes, the type of pipes that you can fill with tobacco. But I think the overall message actually is one of health and reduction in plastic. And therefore, I think it would be good for a unified position to come, actually, which says we want to reduce all types of single-use plastic, even if it means that we have to start having difficult conversations with retailers about how they manage their products, as well as what we think is right in terms of allowing companies to sell products that are ultimately very harmful for young people or for older people.
Very much. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir, and I support this fully. Just make a couple of points regards those who deal with young people throughout our education system. Whenever something like this is introduced, they are, if you like, at the front line of policing young people in delivering this ban. I'd like to see I'd like to work with the Environment Minister and the Infrastructure Minister to ensure schools have everything they need to inform young people, because you've got to start with young people, start really young. Tell them that these things are banned, inform them, give them the information that they need, and then we'll perhaps have a generation where they're not popular, but it's the right thing to do. I'm not so sure whether I want them to be pipe smokers as well, sir. So thank you, sir.
Conor Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I think I was inadvertently misquoted earlier on, sir, saying I've never wanted to ban vapes. I've been speaking out against vapes for some years, sir. Especially the disposable ones, which I will of course be supporting this, but especially when it concerns children with flavours like vanilla, popcorn and toffee apple. I think they are definitely aimed at children, and I don't think they could be banned fast enough. I understand even conventional cigarettes have some with vanilla flavours now, to get young people hooked, allegedly. So I will definitely be supporting this, sir. Thank you.
Does any of the member wish to speak on the principles? Conor St Mary.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, my apologies to the chair of the Environment Panel if she did mention it, but I think she omitted to mention the panel's comments on this issue, and for that I thank our Scrutiny Officer particularly for presenting such a comprehensive report. And just to endorse the comment the chair did make, our conclusion does say that that we welcome support the States Assembly both in its immediate impact and the purchase of single-use vapes, but also the encouragement that it provides towards a behavioural shift away from environmentally damaging disposable products, and that's something which Deputy Tadier and others referred to. Certainly the panel is in full square with the Minister on that, and we look forward to hearing from him in due course on other plans he might have. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir. And as in the past, I can see around here around the Assembly full support for this initiative, which has come from across the government, our infrastructure, environment and health, not just in this government, but as Deputy Renniff acknowledges from previous government as well. I just rise to respond to Deputy Tadier, who in his inimitable way has taken us down the road of pipe smoking. But he is right, and there's no apology for it. This is a health issue which we identified very early on, and we looked for the quickest way to act as a government, and that was through the single-use plastics law. So there is no apology for that. There is a reason, and we've moved as quickly as we can, and I'm glad that members appreciate what we can do when we put our minds to it. I just would end by echoing some words from the chair of my scrutiny panel and the scrutiny panel of the Infrastructure Minister. Vaping has turned into a massive industry with a huge amount of money involved in it, and quite often we see in this type of instance manufacturers will look for loopholes, and they are looking for loopholes as we speak to see how they can get around any legislation that we might pass. And I say to members, certainly from my perspective, and I know from others, we'll be looking continually at how they are attempting to get around the law, to see where we can act in the future to protect our children particularly, because this was, at the end of the day, the real reason that we brought this to the Assembly in such short order. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member, Deputy Binney.
Necessarily, but I think there are major health implications here, so it would be wrong of me not to comment. I'd just like to endorse everything that Deputy List has just said, and say that we just do have to be a little bit careful when deciding on these matters, that we want to maintain the balance between not encouraging vaping as much as we can without taking away the alternative to smoking. So I think we want monitoring everything as it goes through, and we'll be keeping a close eye on further developments as things progress, sir. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles? Then I close the debate and call upon Conor St John.
Thank you, sir, and I thank all members for their comments. So I share Deputy Gardner's concern about the amount of young people using these products. So Deputy Renouf thanked us, but we owe both him and other ministers and the former Chief Minister our thanks for starting the process. And it was a process that we were able to move on with because it was already started. So thanks to them, and I echo his thanks to the officers. The officers working across the government on this have been fantastic, and so I thank them. Deputy Jean and her panel, we thank them and for their support and also for their comments paper. Public health, as we've just heard from the Minister, are looking at the health impacts, but it was felt that this regulation was the easiest and quickest way to bring this to the Assembly and make sure that we could be in time and not end up as a dumping ground for other jurisdictions who may stop earlier than us. We are looking at wider single plastic use, sir. It's a lot of work to do this piecemeal. We'd like to do more, but the timing of this was because we wanted to make sure we were in the queue, so to speak. I echo Deputy Ozef's words about the team at La Collette. Hopefully they'll have less work to do if this is banned, but I do echo his words, and he spoke to me earlier today about the great service he and others receive. So Deputy Tadier, again, I assure him that we're looking at other things. He spoke about whataboutism, and he stole my line about the pipes there, because I expected the question about the single-use cigarettes. So the only pipes I'm interested, sir, as Infrastructure Minister, is drainage pipes, sir. So, we have, I assure him again, we have worked with colleagues in health, and we will continue to look at what else we can do. To Deputy Ward, this problem is not limited to young people, and I don't want young people to be tarred with a brush. This single-use vapes are used by people of all ages, sir. And what we want to do, as I said in my opening speech, is to engage, explain and encourage people, and we will ensure that information is available. And I thank the other members for their support, particularly the Environment Minister and the Health Minister. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And do you call for it, Health? Yes, please. Let us call for, invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P.67, and I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted, 45 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Deputy Jean, does your panel seek to call the matter in? I assume not.
No, sir.
Thank you very much. How do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading?
Sir, en bloc, please. We can take the articles en bloc.
Very well. Are they seconded for second reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? No member wishes to speak in second reading? Then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show. Those against? Do you adopt in third reading?
Thank you, sir. I have nothing to add other than to thank members for their support and reiterate my thanks to Scrutiny and the policy officers, law drafters and everyone engaged with the consultation, sir. And I call for the appel.
Thank you. On the assumption nobody wants to speak. Is it seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading? Then I close the debate and the appel has been called for and I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on third reading for P.67. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law has been adopted in third reading, 45 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is Amendment to Standing Orders, Timeline for Ministerial Appointments, P80, lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to make the following amendments to the Standing Orders of the States of Jersey with immediate effect.
Right up.
Deputy Coles will be responding to this one. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I'd like to thank the members of the Machinery of Government PBC sub-panel that I have chaired. It would escape very few members' attention of the first vote we had at the start of this year, but this led us to learn some lessons. The one lesson that we learnt on our panel was that the election for a new Chief Minister comes about by the same process regardless how a Chief Minister leaves office. This unfortunately includes whether a Chief Minister should die in office. It would be the fact that within 24 hours of the Chief Minister of passing away, nominations would have to be submitted and the process starting automatically for a new Chief Minister to be appointed. Earlier this year, we passed legislation to improve the positions and the accountabilities of the Deputy Chief Minister. So at this point, we thought it would be acceptable and practical that we could extend the period for which a Chief Minister has to be appointed only in the event of a Chief Minister's death to up to 21 days. The main consideration of this is to allow a minimum period of 7 days of mourning to show respect to a Chief Minister who has died in office, for then the presiding officer to use the following 2 weeks to decide when it would be appropriate for an election to take place. Discussions around this did take quite a while, as there was a few matters to consider, as the fact that a by-election would also be called to replace the member in their position within this chamber, whether it was appropriate to wait until that new member had been elected and appointed and sworn in to their position. However, we figured with the length of time of the 6 to 7 weeks for a by-election that would take place, that then this process would be far too long and the island needs its political security. So by consensus of the panel, we came to the 21-day conclusion, and I do hope members agree with that length of time that shows adequate respect, as well as allow other members to grieve and move forward and then return to our stability. Part two comes around because during the debate, it was noticed that some members were having to go around to try and get nominations, start drawing up manifestos, and all this was happening before the debate had even concluded. The result to some may have been obvious, to others it may not, and therefore it seemed unfair and also insensitive to the candidate, the subject of the vote of no confidence. And so, sir, rather than delaying the time frame for which the election of a new Chief Minister should be, we request that the Assembly agree that we actually move the closing point for nominations and submission of a manifesto to 3 days after a vote of no confidence has been approved by the Assembly. I hope so that this makes the process a lot cleaner for members and also offers members the respect they deserve to wait for the outcome of a vote before trying to make sure of what has happened. So it is my intention to take these items separately, as I believe they are very, very different. However, I'm also prepared to take them en bloc if nobody has any objection to that, and I would just like members to consider this, and if they do want these taken separately, please let me know.
Is the proposition seconded? Any member wish to speak? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir.
I just rise because I have just reviewed the proposition once again, and I just want to draw members' attention as the proposition states that in the event that the Chief Minister is deceased, it would be the Deputy Chief Minister who would step in. However, there doesn't seem to be a provision on if the unfortunate circumstance was, of course, that the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister were potentially maybe casualties in an accident. And so what would happen in that event, sir, because I think there has to be a provision for whether that would be the role of the Assistant Chief Minister, or because there's a number of them, to then step in if that was the case. And just secondly, I am a bit concerned about there being concerns regarding the 24-hour time limit for prospective candidates in response to an outcome of a vote of no confidence being successful, given the fact that members would be aware that there is a 2-week lodging period. And so that would give prospective candidates the opportunity to put together a manifesto and to also discuss with their colleagues as to whether those colleagues would be willing to be signatories. And that's all I've really got to say, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Rob Ward.
Just briefly, there is a pecking order of who would take over as Chief Minister. Just to reassure the Assembly, so I'm right at the bottom of that list, so it's okay.
Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Coles has just asked whether or not he would wanted to get confirmation from members if they'd like to take these items separately, and I would support that.
You would like them taken separately?
Yes, please.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Ozee.
Thank you, sir. I must say that I haven't given massive consideration to this. I'm somewhat troubled by the issue of the 3 working day deadline for nominations after a vote of no confidence vote. And I wonder if Deputy Coles, in his capacity as the rapporteur of this, could explain why it's not 5 days. I agree with him that it seemed unseemly. However, given the importance of the role of the Chief Minister and the subsequent fallout that a fall of a government, presumably there's no urgency for this now. We're not expecting another New Year activity. I just wondered whether or not some really mature consideration had been given to 3 working days after a vote of no confidence, and whether or not, because it's not just, if I may check, it's not just the nomination issue, it's also the manifesto, and I know that's requiring 6 signatures, and I haven't quite got my proposition in front of me, but the whole issue does he really believe that these are days of necessary time for reflection, of replacing the leader of government and all, because it's not just it's the Chief Minister that falls, it's the whole government. And it just seems to me to be 3 days is incredibly hasty.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Farn.
Thank you, sir. I think Deputy Ozee raises a valid point, having been through that experience. I mean, the previous timescales were very tight indeed and made it rather difficult. I think can be done in line, but look forward to Deputy's explanation. I presume further thought could be considered, but I just wanted to reassure members that although I'll enthusiastically vote for these amendments, standing orders, I very much hope none of them ever come to bear, sir. And in relation to the unlikely event of the Deputy Chief Minister and a demise being at the same time, well, I think the Assembly will just have to try and manage without us. So I did, and I promise I will not, we agree not to ride on the same tractor together in the meantime. Thank you.
Point of order, sir. Can I just check whether or not you take over in that situation?
I don't think I do.
It's a
I
season of
think
goodwill, sir.
The most I would do is to facilitate, so far as possible, the resolutions of the Assembly being taken and put into practice. But I think certainly no. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Coles to respond.
Thank you, sir. First, I'll just thank Deputy Wilson. So, yes, I will take this in parts, as there is a request to do so. Deputy Andrews, as Deputy Ward has alluded to, there is actually a line of ministerial succession about who will take the place should the Chief Minister and Deputy Chief Minister. I'm looking over my shoulder because it's either Deputy Gorse or Deputy Labbit, who I believe is third on that list.
I'd prefer it if we didn't give anybody any ideas.
Deputy Joseph, I just want to make the point that we had quite a lengthy discussion. Actually, this is why it ended up coming in December this year, because actually some of these points were very much discussed around what is a reasonable length of time without being too long, but also to allow people to digest and come up with questions for manifestos to exist. And there has to be a balance. In fact, Deputy Scott mentioned 4 days. The rest of the panel thought maybe that edged too far. And so we came to the consensus that 3 was reasonable, as it's also 3 times longer than the current, as it's 24 hours after the debate. Of course, this is a standing order, and this is also for members, so an amendment can be brought back by another member if they don't believe that this is long enough, and I'm willing to hear their arguments for it, as I believe there should be flexibility in that time. But however, this is certainly an improvement on what is the current format. And Deputy Andrews, I forget the second point that you asked me to make, if you can clarify. Sorry, through the chair. If Deputy Andrews could just quickly clarify for me what his second point was.
Second point
indeed, sir. It was just for the 24-hour period that is given to prospective candidates for Chief Minister upon voting no confidence in the Chief Minister being successful.
So, thank you, and thank you to the Deputy. That is what this the amendment does, is remove the 24-hour period and extends it to 3 working days for that nomination period. For your manifesto, for the candidate's manifesto, and their signatures to be presented to the greffier, so that the resulted election can then take place 4 days later in this assembly. So with that, sir, I make the proposition, and I will take these in parts, and I call for the appel.
It's called for on both parts. The first vote then will be on part 1 of the proposition. And I ask members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part 1 has been adopted, 44 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. I ask the greffier to reset the machine. And the vote now is on part 2 of the proposition, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part 2 has been adopted, 41 votes pour, 3 votes contre, no abstention.
Those voting contre, the Deputy Joseph, Wilson and Andrews.
I now come to that part where I think I should test what the Assembly wishes to do. There are 3 propositions. The first relating to Jersey Overseas Aid Commission appointment to non-states commissioner. The second relating to Deputy Kovac's proposition relating to support scheme for individuals qualifying to represent Jersey. And the third Controller and Auditor General Board of Governance appointment of a chair, and then because that will bring the last sitting of this year to an end, there are the traditional greetings as well. So it's a matter whether or not at this stage we move on and carry on, or whether the adjournment is proposed, I think.
Sir, if I...
The adjournment... I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
The adjournment is proposed. Very well. Those in favour of adopting the adjournment kindly show. Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned then until 9:30. Sorry?
Have the appel, please, sir, if it's
The
not too
appel?
late.
Oh, very well. So I'm sorry. The appel is called for. And then the appel is called for, and in which case I may have misread the standing in the room. The appel is called for, and I invite those in favour of the adjournment at this stage kindly kindly vote. That's if you don't vote. So a vote for means we adjourn now until tomorrow morning. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The vote for the adjournment is adopted. 29 votes for, 15 votes contre, 1 abstention. Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.